founder of the Library Freedom Project, an initiative aimed at bringing privacy education and tools into libraries. She describes herself as a librarian, agitator, and feminist vigilante.
You found that from my Twitter profile.
I did. You have a web presence.
Yeah.
And she's an activist fighting for patron privacy rights and education in Massachusetts libraries and beyond. And Kade Crockford over here is a director of the Technology for Liberty program at the ACLU of Massachusetts, where they work to challenge the growing surveillance state and defend core First and Fourth Amendment and due process rights. They also built and maintain the dedicated privacy website www.privacysos.org, which hosts the Privacy Matters blog. Kade is currently working on a long-term project to document and challenge the militarization and federalization of state and local law enforcement. The project focuses on the procurement and deployment of advanced surveillance and weapons systems with the goal of bringing local police back under local control. And I want to add that excitingly we have Jessie Rossman here, who's a staff attorney at the ACLU of Massachusetts and an expert in surveillance law. Also, she'd like to know that she loves librarians. And Kade and Alison have been working together for over a year now on issues of privacy and surveillance as they relate to libraries, and have been presenting all over Massachusetts and, of course, even farther afield around the country. And in ICE.
Oh, we got invited to
Oslo.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
But we didn't go. It's like kind of sort of up in the air, but yeah, they invited us.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, soon to be
Right.
conquering the rest of the world. Before I want to start, I also want to thank the Simmons College Media Lab for filming this presentation. Thank you so much. And also uploading it so this incredible resource can be shared with others. And also the student chapter of the Association for Information Science and Technology, who is co-sponsoring this event. So thank you for being patient, and now we will get started.
Cool. Okay, so I'm first. I'll just tell you before I start my presentation that the way this is going to work is that I'll talk for about 40 minutes. Sometimes it goes longer than that. And what I'm going to do is tell you about some government surveillance programs, basically, and also give you my pitch about why I think libraries and librarians should care about privacy maybe more than most people. And then Jessie is going to get up here and give you a Know Your Rights training, basically, that is very specific to the concerns of libraries and librarians. After that, Alison is going to take you on a whirlwind tour through a whole bunch of tools that you can install on library computers and your own machines to prevent some of the corporate and government tracking that I'm going to tell you about right now. So here we go. First, I should say thank you. This is really lovely. We usually don't go to events that are populated with as much delicious food as this, so I appreciate your hospitality. So, okay, libraries. Libraries are stewards of access to information and privacy. So we've heard a lot about surveillance over the past year and a half since Edward Snowden blew the whistle on the NSA and FBI's surveillance programs. It's a lot of information to take in, but this is pretty much all you need to know. The government's goal is to collect all available information in the world and perform advanced data mining and algorithmic breakdowns of that information to draw from it inferences and new discoveries that the information alone would not be able to present to the authorities. So I'll show you about why that's so scary in a second. Why should you care, though, specifically as librarians? Well, I encourage you to look at this PEN America study that came out last year. It's called Chilling Effects. And PEN, which probably many of you know is one of the foremost literary organizations in the country, in the world actually, but PEN America did this study and they talked to academics, researchers, writers about the effect that pervasive, near omnipresent government and corporate surveillance has on their work. And the results shouldn't actually be shocking, but they are. They found that 1 in 6 writers has avoided writing or speaking on a topic that they thought might subject them to targeted surveillance. Another 1 in 6 has seriously considered doing that. Writers are not only worried about government surveillance, they are also engaging actively in self-censorship as a result. And I just want to take a pause here for a moment It's maybe not super obvious to everyone that there's a direct link between surveillance and censorship, but this, I think, should elucidate that connection for all of you, if you don't already know it instinctively. 28% of the writers they surveyed have curtailed or avoided social media. Another 12% have considered doing that. Nearly 1 in 4 of the writers they talked to have deliberately avoided certain topics in communications. Another 10% have seriously considered it, so nearly, over 1 in 3 of these people have either seriously considered or actively censored themselves in conversations with colleagues, friends, loved ones. This is the United States of America, not Stasi Germany. 16% avoided writing or speaking about a particular topic, and another 11% seriously considered it. These are some quotes that some of the writers gave to Penn. I feel increased government surveillance has had a chilling effect on my research, most of which I do on the internet, like everyone else in the world. This includes research on issues such as drug wars and mass incarceration, which people don't think about as much as they think about foreign terrorism, but is just as pertinent. Think about this quote in the context of what's going on right now in this country with massive rebellions against mass incarceration and police violence against people of color in the streets across the United States, in cities including Boston. Academics are afraid to write about these issues. What does that mean? I mean, if Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, had never been written, where would this country be right now? What would be the perception, another person said, if I Googled nuclear blast, bomb shelters, radiation, secret plans, weaponry, and so on, and are librarians required to report requests for materials about fallout and national emergencies and so on? I don't know. No, you're not. You should tell people that. The codification of surveillance as the new norm with all different forms and layers is changing the world in ways I think I fail to grasp still. This is of great concern, that the foundations are being laid and reinforced so that by the time we fully realize that we live in this condition, it will be too late. Someone else said, this may well prove a great detriment to the study of foreign cultures, especially in this country with a subsequent loss of international understanding. I like to do a thought exercise when I think about the impact that surveillance has on writers, academics, researchers. I like to close my eyes and think about a library full of books and imagine blank spaces where books that were never written would have been, are now, but might be in the future never written because someone was afraid to pursue a research topic, write about something controversial, etc. And the obvious book, I think, to illustrate this thought exercise is Lolita. There's, maybe you think it's justified, maybe you think it's overblown, but there's a hysteria in this country about child sexual abuse. The FBI, every time it opens its mouth, is talking about child porn. It's one of the ways that the government justifies a lot of its electronic surveillance programs. Not to say that child porn isn't a serious crime, but I wonder if the book Lolita would be written today. I think that there's a good reason to believe it might not be. And do we think that that's good? Do we think that that's a decent thing in a democratic society? So the ALA, as you all probably know, is great on privacy issues. They have helped us in the ACLU in Washington, D.C. lobbying against the so-called Library Records Act, Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which I'll get into in detail a little bit more. They have a great website that has tons of resources for librarians, chooseprivacyweek.org. And at their website, they also hit home on this connection between censorship and surveillance and democracy in libraries. And they say, why is this important in libraries? Because the freedom to read and receive ideas anonymously is at the heart of individual liberty in a democracy. I think, couldn't say it better than that. So now let's talk about the problem, now that you know why librarians should care about it. Well, like I said before, even just the NSA stories that came out from only Edward Snowden's leaks are quite overwhelming. I mean, this is what I do for a living, and this is hard to keep up with. Those headlines that I showed you just now are a year old already. I mean, I haven't updated this presentation in basically a year. So there are a million tell you about a couple of specific surveillance authorizations and programs, just so you have a sort of big picture understanding of what is going on at the federal level. So, I don't know if you have seen this slide, but it illustrates a government program called PRISM, which you've probably heard about. PRISM is authorized under something called the FISA Amendments Act of 2008. The FISA Amendments Act, or FAA, which is a nicely confusing acronym, because it also means Federal Aviation Administration, it was the law that George Bush passed in 2008 at the very end of his second term to essentially institutionalize and put an imprimatur, Congress's imprimatur of, legality on his warrantless wiretapping program, which was disclosed by the New York Times in 2005. That warrantless wiretapping program had been in existence since just after 9/11, when essentially the nation's so-called intelligence agencies took the gloves off and started doing things that they previously had been banned from doing, such as wiretapping Americans' communications without warrants. So the FISA Amendments Act of 2008 basically legalizes that warrantless wiretapping program. And I put legalizes in quotes because it's blatantly illegal under the Constitution. Statutes can be unconstitutional. We at the ACLU have tried very, very hard to prove through the courts that this statute is unconstitutional. Thus far, we have failed, and I can tell you more about that later if you're curious to hear the details. But FISA is, the government says, provides authorization for the PRISM program. Now, under FISA, if you read the actual text of the bill, you will see that it gives the government the authority to wiretap U.S. persons' communications as long as the government reasonably believes that one end of that conversation is outside the United States with a foreigner. So just think about that. You have friends who live in Canada. If you have family in, the Middle East, if you email a school in France, the NSA thinks that it has the legal authority to wiretap your communications without a warrant. And that's under the FISA Amendments Act of 2008. So these are content programs. These are programs that enable the government, and authorizations that enable the government to actually listen to the words that you're saying on the phone, in real time even, to read the words that you write in emails, to read your text messages, to rifle through your Dropbox folders and go through all your Evernote notes and all the rest, the actual content. These are programs that authorize content surveillance. So PRISM, as you probably heard, is a program that the NSA developed with the FBI that essentially enables them to go to providers like Google and Facebook and Yahoo and Apple and issue huge numbers of demands on accounts, all without going to normal courts. They go to this thing called the FISA Intelligence Surveillance Court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, FISC, which is not a real court. It meets in secret. There's only one party, the government, present in the court. And all of the justices on the FISC are selected by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Currently, I believe every single sitting FISC judge was appointed by a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who was appointed by a Republican. So they're all Republicans, basically, on the FISC right now. So these secret courts authorize orders that grant the government the ability to say to Facebook or Google, we want these 10,000 accounts, and when they say accounts, they mean everything. Every search, every IP address that has ever logged on to these accounts, and that is your physical location, basically. Every chat, every email, every live chat or Skype session, everything you can imagine that these companies have on you, every Facebook message you've ever sent, your entire social network on Facebook can be divulged to the NSA through one of these orders that is not democratic at all and involves no outside oversight or accountability, and people have no right to challenge. You also probably will never find out about it. So that's pretty scary. But it's not the scariest thing, actually. Upstream collection, I think, is the scariest thing. Upstream collection, which is also, they say, authorized under the FISA Amendments Act, allows the NSA, basically, so you can see here, this is the United States. It's also really funny when the NSA says, we do foreign intelligence. I'm like, wow, and why does your PowerPoint focus on this country? Because that's the United States of America. It is not Iran or Russia. So, you know, take with a very heavy grain of salt the things that these liars say publicly, because they're liars. I mean, they're trained liars. They're spies. That's what they do. They lie. So they lie and they say, no, we don't spy on Americans. Well, you can see on this slide that, in fact, they are extremely invested in spying on Americans. And upstream collection, you can see this is the internet moving from Boston, New York, DC. There's a whole lot of internet going on over here. Moving to Europe, whatever, undersea cables. This is how the internet is carried. There are these big, fat fiber cables that are actually under the ocean. They're very deep in the ocean. And upstream collection means the NSA literally sends people in scuba gear down into the ocean, and they attach vacuum cleaners to the pipes that move the world's internet traffic, and they suck it up. And that's what upstream means. So the other thing here that I've showed you, and they have these very fancy computer systems, these enormous, they're called deep packet inspection computers that enable NSA and FBI to program what they call selectors into these computers, so they could either say, we want every phone call with this phone number, or we want every bit of content coming out of this city. We want every piece of communication, electronic communication that references this name. So that's deep packet inspection. So that's how they sort of filter and manage what, you know, through the torrent of information that comes through the internet every day, through the upstream collection. So another authority that they use to govern these programs is something called Federal Executive Order 12333. That's what the spies call it, 12333. 12333 was signed by Ronald Reagan, and it is basically the executive order that gives all the spy agencies all of their power. You can read it. It's not very long. It's kind of interesting. So those are the main two problematic authorities. We don't know very much about what spies do using 12333. It's very secretive. So that's the content side. You'll remember that after the first Edward Snowden disclosure was a Verizon, it was a FISC order from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. Again, note the word foreign in the name of the court. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, the first piece of paper that we saw from Ed Snowden's disclosures was a court order from that court to Verizon, ordering Verizon to give the NSA and the FBI every single record of every single phone call that Verizon business customers had made during a three-month period. So this is what a lot of people call the Dragnet phone surveillance program. Some people call it the metadata program. That program, the government says, is authorized under Section 215 of the Patriot Act. That is the same section that I referenced before, that the ALA helped the ACLU actually improve a little bit to get library records removed, right, Jesse? Yeah, from that provision. But 215, the government says, allows them essentially to collect every piece of metadata in the world in bulk. No suspicion of wrongdoing. So every phone call you made today, tomorrow, last week, will be collected by the NSA and the FBI through this program. Everyone in this room. Happens as a matter of course. It's been going on for at least 8 years, potentially longer than that. So it's authorized, they say, under Section 215 of the Patriot Act, but it's not just phone records, probably, that the government is collecting in bulk with this authorization as its excuse. Most likely, they're also collecting bank records, credit card records. Senator Ron Wyden, who sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee and is really one of the only people in Congress who seems to give a crap about any of this stuff, has warned publicly, sort of, you know, circuitously, that the NSA has been collecting cell phone location information in bulk under the 215 authority through the Patriot Act. So when this stuff first came out, the Verizon business order first dropped in The Guardian and there were stories all over the press, President Obama got in front of the nation at a press conference at the White House, and he said, famously, infamously, in my view, no one is listening to your phone calls. No one is listening to your phone calls. This program is just oriented at seeing the big picture so that we can identify terrorists and terrorist networks and take them out, to stop terrorist attacks, to protect the homeland. No one's listening to your phone calls. Whether or not that's true is, facially, I'm not sure if that statement is actually true, but even if it is true, it is so dishonest, because he was derailing away from the real issue, which is that if the government collects every single record of every single communication made in this country, they have access to everyone's social network, everyone's employment network. They know basically everything about everyone. They don't need to listen to the words that you're saying on the phone in order to know probably more about you than you know about yourself. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. So who cares about metadata? Well, metadata is in some ways more revealing than content. The way that the spies think about it is like metadata, the 215 program, is basically like an index for the content. And that's a good metaphor, I think, for libraries and librarians because you understand indices, right? So the 215 program, they collect everything. They know everyone's social networks. They know everyone who everyone is talking to. And so they know they can look through the index and say, okay, look at Jimmy's now talking to Allison. We got to find out what Jimmy's saying. So then they go over to the content side, which is much more labor intensive as far as actual data storage because storing voice and actual content just takes up a lot more space than metadata, which is very small. So then they can go and, all right, well, we have the entire index. Makes it very easy to pull out from the content exactly what they want. That's not just why metadata is revealing, though, and incredibly powerful. First of all, metadata doesn't lie. If I were to call Allison right now and say, hey Al, I'm in Texas, I'm hanging out with my brother, having a really good time, I'll catch you later, bye. She does not know whether or not what I'm saying is true, but the phone company knows that it's a lie because the metadata shows that I'm actually in Boston, not in Texas, and it shows the date and the time and the length of the phone call. None of those things can be changed by the person who made the phone call. They are absolutely guaranteed facts. And so if you're a spy or a cop, that is really good intelligence for you because it is always true. There is nothing corruptible about that, unless, of course, I was using someone else's phone. So how can this be powerful for a government that maybe doesn't have its citizens' best interests at heart, for example, ours? Well, this is an image of, this is fake, this is not real. Somebody who was concerned about this issue and really concerned about the misinformation, frankly, that the government was putting out after the Snowden revelations about metadata. Oh, it's nothing, it's not your conversations. Made this to show how powerful it is. Basically, this is a fake map of the social connections and political connections between Revolutionary War fighters in the United States. So you can see this is Paul Revere right here. This is Samuel Peck. And John Smith is up there. There are some other dudes, crusty old white dudes. So if you were the British government, you don't need to know what these people are saying in order to take out the American Revolution if you have this map. This is just metadata, records of who communicates with who. If I was the British government and I had this map, I would simply arrest or kill these people and those people in the middle, and then these four giant clusters of people have no communication. They don't know each other. They have no way of relating to each other. So you basically decapitate the movement simply by taking out the people who are the connections in between it. That's just one of many illustrations of metadata. This is another really good one. You should look this up, and if you have a Gmail account, which I'm embarrassed to say I still do, you can do this for yourself, and you really should. It's amazing. when I said before that metadata will teach you things that you don't know about yourself, this is what I'm talking about. Check this out. So some students at MIT, again, frustrated that the national conversation around metadata was so bad, basically, and error-ridden, created this program that scrolls, it basically scrapes all of the metadata from your Gmail account and produces for you a little interactive map of your life. This is just a still image of someone's that I got off of Google, it's not mine, but in the actual program there's also like a time bar, so you can drag, 2009, 2010, whatever, and the larger the circle, the more you communicate with that person. You can see that the people who are the same color are people who are within the same social network. So for example, if this was mine, I did this for me, this would be my work friends, that would be my friends from Miami, these would be my college friends, and that would be people I organize with outside of work. And then, these outliers, like if I were a spook and I was looking at this, I would think, who the hell is Noel? What does Noel have to do with this person? Because Noel doesn't know anybody else that this person knows. So this person might be fishy. So when I did this for myself, and it was like completely horrifying because I dragged the bar along, and really it was like a tour of all of my failed relationships. Like, one girlfriend would get really big and then shrink, and then it would be like another, and I was like, oh my god! It was so obvious.
You can see one growing and the other shrinking.
Yeah, oops. Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, you learn things about yourself that you don't even know or remember from looking at metadata. So just, it's chilling really to imagine what government agents, how many millions of them we don't really know, or private security people with security clearance have access to this kind of information about all of us. It's alarming. Another example that I heard that I think is a good one is like records of your phone's metadata. It'll show if you're having trouble sleeping, for example. If you're staying up all night on Twitter, suddenly, after your partner breaks up with you or whatever. There are real incredible indications of not just social networks, but also mental health and all sorts of other things that people can derive from metadata alone. So, this I'll just go through very quickly. XKeyscore is another NSA program. There are dozens of these, though. I mean, this is really just not even scratching the surface. This is sort of like the government's Google, like the spies Google. This is a system that enables them to tap into all of the various data that they've collected about us. There was one story that came out that said that NSA analysts can actually watch your thought process, seeing what you type as you type it and deleting it on services like Facebook and Google. And again, this is the selectors, and analysts can search by name, telephone number, IP address, keywords, the language in which the internet activity was conducted, even the type of browser used. Like I said, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but if you want to see a really cool timeline that the ACLU put together that includes all of the programs that have been disclosed so far, you can go to this website. It's pretty. And it's not just the NSA. So here in Boston, the Boston Police Department has something called the Boston Regional Intelligence Center. How many people in here have heard of that? I'm not very good at my job. Okay. So the BRIC, the Boston Regional Intelligence Center, is one of, I think, just about 80 so-called fusion centers nationwide. These are places that the Department of Homeland Security paid to set up throughout the country. And essentially they're little spy centers where local, state, and federal law enforcement, as well as members of the military, and who knows, maybe CIA at some of these places, and private security sometimes, sit and access and produce incredible amounts of information about all of us. These places are very secretive. We do not know very much about what goes on at them, but we pay for them, so that's nice. Here in Boston, we do know that the Boston Police Department's Fusion Center, the BRIC, has a bad history already. It's barely been around for 10 years, and already has a nasty history of spying on anti-war protesters, the left more broadly, writing intelligence files, so-called, about groups like Vets for Peace and Code Pink, calling them homeland security threats and domestic extremists and all this other garbage. So this is what's happening in places like this. They have a whole lot of money. They've got literally hundreds of millions of dollars from the Department of Homeland Security to build these places. And again, are very secretive. We had to sue to get the information out of them about spying on peace groups. And likely, if we ever want any more information from them, we'll sue them again. Right, Jessie?
May or may not.
She's such a lawyer. All right. So I am not a lawyer. Let's sue them. Okay. So I don't know if you recognize this nasty old guy, but this is J. Edgar Hoover, my arch nemesis, even though he's dead. I spit on his grave. So J. Edgar Hoover was perhaps the most petty and tyrannical authoritarian this country has ever known. He is the godfather of the FBI, basically, ran the FBI for decades, close to 60 years, I think. I mean, it's hard to believe, but he really did create the culture that has lasted into the present of what the FBI is all about. So today, the FBI is, in some ways, way worse than it was under Hoover. I mean, how many people in here are familiar with COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program that the FBI ran to basically destroy black movements for liberation in this country, American Indian movements, attacked the anti-war movement and draft resistors. Basically, you know, Hoover's enemy was anyone in the United States who sought to, you know, really bring justice for marginalized people or even attempt to rein in the military-industrial complex during the Vietnam War. So, not a very nice guy, very powerful, and today the FBI has a lot more power, in part just because of the technology that they have access to. You'll note that every time I talked about the NSA surveillance programs, I also said FBI. One of the major problems with the reporting that has, even at The Guardian, frankly, that has gone on since Edward Snowden blew the whistle, is that there's been a whole lot of focus on the NSA, which does not put Americans in prison, and almost none on the FBI, which does. The FBI is basically our secret police organization in this country. And they have access to all of that information that I was talking about before, particularly the metadata. So it's quite scary. And they are here in Boston, working with the Boston Police Department and other local law enforcement agencies through something called the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is obviously really bad at stopping terrorism. Can't do it, apparently. And the Massachusetts State Police also runs a fusion center. Theirs is called the Commonwealth Fusion Center. It's in Maynard, Massachusetts. Again, similar deal, place where state and local law enforcement sit with feds and members of the military and private security companies to monitor all of us in secret. So I'm almost done, but I'll just tell you a couple more things. Local cops are, it's not just the feds who are doing advanced electronic surveillance, local cops are doing it too. Through our cell phones, every time, oh Allison, you need to go pay the meter.
I know, oh my god.
Like we have 15 minutes.
Okay, I got it.
Thank you.
Sorry, send this.
I don't want to get a ticket. Okay, so every time we go anywhere with one of these things, we are leaving a digital trail of our movements. Thanks to Jessie Rossman. Come on, girl. She's so humble, it's ridiculous. Thanks to Jessie Rossman, we now are protected from law enforcement warrantlessly accessing the location information that our cell phones send to phone companies, because Jessie and our colleague Matt, our legal director Matt Siegel, won a path-breaking case called Augustine versus the state of Massachusetts, Commonwealth, whatever. Basically, now the law of the land says that local and state cops have to get a warrant before accessing our phone information. The feds, on the other hand, do not. So those joint terrorism task force things and the fusion centers that I was talking about before, there's a lot of sketchiness about whether or not even Boston police officers are getting warrants to track our cell phones if they are deputized as federal agents through those programs, etc. So there's a lot of location tracking going on, but it's not just location tracking through our cell phones. How many people in here have heard of automatic license plate readers? Oh, good. Better at my job. Okay. So license plate readers are devices that are either affixed to the back of squad cars, or maybe under bridges, or at like traffic lights with the other millions of surveillance technologies that have grown like disgusting, rotten fruit everywhere all over our world. And they take pictures of every single license plate that passes by them, thousands per minute even. So there's a state trooper parked on the side of the highway. Every car that drives by, if he has a license plate reader in his cruiser, they're clocking images of every single car. The problem is that cops do not delete this information. Here in Massachusetts, there is no law, none, governing the use of this technology. So not just cops, but private companies too, are collecting huge troves of information. Every time one of these images is snapped, the device not only takes a picture of the car and the license plate, but marks down the time, date, and location where that image was taken. So essentially this is a massive, again, another dragnet location tracking program that police and private companies are doing, almost entirely unregulated. There are some states that have laws governing this kind of stuff. New Hampshire's is the best. They just about ban the technology. Live free or die. But not here in Massachusetts. Not live free, live or something. Okay. So that's license plate readers. We're working on that. If you're concerned about that, you should call your state rep in the next legislative session and tell them to support legislation to regulate this stuff. Obviously, there are surveillance cameras everywhere. Surveillance cameras are something that you're probably going to encounter professionally at libraries. There are surveillance cameras in libraries. There are surveillance cameras on the side of libraries now. And I think there's a huge misconception in this country about what surveillance cameras actually do. Some people even call them security cameras. They're not. There are very few empirical studies that demonstrate surveillance cameras have any impact on stopping crime, preventing any sort of crime. And the few that do really just suggest that they stop petty crimes like vandalism. Surveillance cameras do not stop violent crimes. There is no evidence to show that. So, be very careful. I can give you a lot more information about that and access to the studies and stuff like that, but just be very careful when people tell you that they need surveillance cameras because there's some sort of security problem. It's probably not going to help with the security problem. And finally, I will end with stingrays, the scariest of all. So stingrays are devices that let the cops go around Jesse's lovely court precedent, not even having to send a subpoena or a court order or a warrant to AT&T or Verizon to get information from your phone company about how you're using your phone, where you went, where you're going, where you are. They actually can do it themselves now with no cooperation from the phone companies. And they do it using these devices called stingrays. That's actually like the Kleenex term. It's a brand name. The real name is cell site simulator. And what a cell site simulator does is trick cell phones into thinking that the cops are the cell phone tower. And so instead of your phone communicating with AT&T or Verizon or whichever tower is closest to you physically, you're going to be communicating with the police. So there are a number of ways in which police can use these tools. We have thought for some time that the majority of deployments in this country are simply to find people. Say they're mostly used in drug cases because that's pretty much our entire policing system is oriented around the drug war. So say I'm, cop Jimmy and I'm looking for Jessie because she's a drug dealer and I know it, and I want to find her so I can arrest her. I have this stingray device and I plug in her phone information that I got maybe with a subpoena to the phone company, or maybe I already knew it, and then I drive around the neighborhood where I think she might be. And it almost acts like that game that you played when you were a kid, like hotter and colder. It'll tell you, like, beep, 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 oh, she's over here, that kind of thing. So it can help cops locate people in real time, well, locate cell phones, I should say, not people. And it can also wiretap. So if I really hated Jessie because she broke my heart, and I'm a cop, and I'm like, man, I'm gonna spy on Jessie. Jessie's such a biatch. So I drive outside her house in my spooky surveillance van, and I park there with my stingray, and I listen to every phone call that she makes in her house, read all of her text messages, look at all of the things she's doing on her phone through the internet, read her emails, because they have wiretap capability. Now, we haven't been certain for part of the problem with all surveillance is that difficult job. And with stingrays, it's particularly difficult. They have worked so hard to keep the existence of this technology secret from the public that the FBI has actually forced local police departments to sign non-disclosure agreements, which are illegal, I'm sure. I mean, they haven't been challenged in court, but I am assuming, or they are being challenged.
In process.
Yeah, we haven't had a decision yet. But anyway, the FBI is forcing local police to sign non-disclosure agreements saying that they won't talk to the press about this technology. Like they're the CIA or something. These are local cops. And they're acting like they have the right to withhold public information about how our money is spent from the public because, you know, these are such serious technologies that they need. How are they actually using them? Like I said, to go after drug dealers.
And they're seizing the records.
What?
They're seizing the records.
Oh yeah, that's the craziest thing. So in Florida, we have a colleague who has been pursuing this issue doggedly, trying to pull information out of these secretive police departments about the use of stingrays. And in Florida, they sent a public records request to this one department, Sarasota? Yeah. Sarasota police eventually wrote back and said, okay, we have these documents. So our colleague was actually going to go and pick them up from the police department. But you know who went to the police department to pick them up first? The federal marshals. And they seized the documents and scurried away to a federal building where they held them and said, these are now federal documents. You know, the Sarasota police does not possess them anymore, therefore they can't give them to you under Florida's open records law.
And this was over and above a state court judge who had ordered the police department to turn them over. And then if that stood down, the judge was like, I have no.
It was like kidnapping. It was like kidnapping of documents, basically, to keep information from the public secret that, as Jesse said, a judge had ordered released. It's really incredible. So, you know, stingrays have been in use now in this country at least since 2008. We know that police departments like the Tacoma, Washington Police Department, which is hardly the NYPD, right, has been using stingrays since 2008. So my question now is, what are they doing now that we're going to find out about in 10 years? I mean, you know, this kind of stuff is truly alarming. So the last thing I'll do before turning it over to Jesse is show you something that happened very recently. This works. Okay, so this is so the other day somebody tweeted this image from Chicago, a protest in Chicago. This was like 2 days ago. You can't really see it, but these are surveillance cameras on top of this truck. And this truck was driving around at a protest, Black Lives Matter protest, Eric Garner protest in Chicago. And this woman, as you can see, she says, what the hell is in here? It messes up my phone every time it drives by. So I was like, oh, it's a stingray. So then, I wrote about it on my blog, which you should read if you want to have nightmares. Or just never trust anyone ever again. It's probably more apt. So I wrote about it on my blog, you know, like, oh, it looks like a stingray, did the cops get a warrant, whatever. And then, 2 days later, Anonymous, infamous Anonymous, releases this video that appears to suggest the Chicago Police Department were using the stingray's wiretap capabilities to actually listen in real time to things that protesters, organizers specifically, were saying. So I'm not going to play the video, but basically it says, well, I'll play it. No, there's no sound. So what they say is, as you can see, the dispatch says, you know, the fusion center's on the air for a mobile. One officer says, go ahead. The other says, yeah, one of the girls, an organizer here, she's been on her phone a lot. You guys picking up any information where they're going, possibly? So then the other officer says, yeah, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll let you know if we hear anything. And then the other cop in the street says, they're compliant and they're doing okay now, but she's spending a lot of time on the phone. Heaven forbid, right? She dared to speak on her cell phone in public. Better use this, you know, CIA-style technology to spy on her. So this is the kind of stuff that's going on in this country right now. I know that the things that I just talked about might seem a little bit remote to the library context, but I think setting the stage for what Alison and Jesse are going to say is really important, only because we really do live in a surveillance society, a surveillance state in this country. You know, you are spied on every single day by not just government actors, but a whole host of private corporations in ways that if you knew about, you would be absolutely horrified. So our job is to try to bring to light some of that secret spying so that people will be appropriately horrified and we can stop it from happening. This is a really great resource. It's the Organization for Economic Development, I think, that put this together. And it's really, it's, for a lot of you, it probably won't be revolutionary information, but it's super, super useful and concise and tells you simply things like, if you don't need the information, don't keep it. Don't ever log it if you don't need it for any good reason. Always delete and purge systems when information is not useful to you anymore. Because really anything you as a librarian keep in your system is either hackable by the government, so they might just come in and steal it like they did to Google, or they can actually come through the front door and demand it, which is what Jesse's going to tell you about now. Should we take a break first?
Yeah,
Or?
let's take like a 5-minute break so people don't have to roll.
Also, if you guys have questions,
Yeah.
feel free.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So what did you say you were embarrassed to have a Gmail?
Oh, I mean, Gmail, it's a really tricky sort of double-edged sword because Gmail's system is more secure than the vast majority of systems in the sense that some random hacker is not going to be able to break into your email account. Google has very well-paid security engineers who make sure that that's the case. On the other hand, Google is like the singularity. I mean, Google knows so much about everyone in this country, almost everybody in the world at this point who's ever used a computer. And for the same reason that I'm concerned that the FBI and the NSA know too much, Google knows too much. And if you want to read a really devastating, horrifying, maybe not very subtle breakdown of what this actually looks like, what Google's power looks like, you should read Dave Eggers' book, The Circle. It's really good. I'm not a big Eggers fan, but this book totally blew my mind. So
But what are the
it's a really quick
alternatives?
read.
I mean,
too.
they're all susceptible to being spied. All emails, aren't all emails equally?
Yeah, the problem with Google though is that, I have this on another presentation, Google has like a bajillion services, right? So they have Google Maps, you probably used 5 of them today, right? They have Google Voice over IP services, they have obviously Google, which everyone basically uses to search for information and visit websites and surf the World Wide Web internet. So they just, they have, so for example, the other email provider that I use is this service called RiseUp, which is very small, it's for activists only, and it's funded only by donations and it's all volunteer labor. RiseUp does not have a search engine. They do not track me when I'm looking up directions, right? They're not tracking my phone in the way that Google is. So it's not just that the email is, I should back up and say one more thing, which is that Google is an advertising company, fundamentally. That's how they make all their money. They give you free services, and in exchange, you're the product. I mean, they sell you and everything about you, and they make billions of dollars every year doing it. So, Google's very scary. They know too much.
And I think in contrast to a service like RiseUp, who theoretically, not even theoretically, but could have access to your email content on their servers because they are managing, whatever content you've got in your RiseUp email account. We know that Google inspects your email. I mean, they use the content of your email to sell you more services. So one of the things I want to talk about is behavioral advertising. In your Google account, I'm sure you've seen, you send your spouse an email about picking up dog food and then suddenly you have advertisements for dog food on the side. So, that I think is one of the fundamental differences between, and it's true about Yahoo, it's true about whatever other major email providers. There are very few that respect your privacy, but I'm going to talk about that a little further.
Okay.
What is your blog?
privacysos.org/blog.
I used to have this email account that you can send encrypted emails, and I don't remember what it's called. I haven't kept up with that. But does that make any difference?
Yes.
As far as-
Encrypting your email totally makes a difference. There is no such thing as total security. If you are so there's this thing called like a threat assessment, basically, which is something the government says, funnily enough, but they mean something different. When we say it, we're talking about figuring out who is your adversary. So if you're a woman who's being abused by your partner, he's your adversary. There's a lot of digital stalking that goes on today in domestic violence, violent relationships domestically. And so if she's trying to protect herself from her creepy boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, she's gonna have, you know, specific measures to take given his knowledge, his ability to spy on her, whatever. The NSA is a very different adversary, right? So in order to protect yourself, you have to first understand who you're trying to protect yourself against. If you're trying to protect yourself against the NSA, you should never touch a computer or a phone because they will get you somehow.
If you're a target.
Right, if you're a target, if they want to get you, they will. On the other hand, if you're simply trying to keep corporations or local police or whatever from spying on you, encrypting your email absolutely works. Yes.
One thing to note about encrypted email, the metadata is still discoverable.
Unless you use Tor.
Well, if you use Tor Birdie in Thunderbird.
Yeah, well, what? We don't
Yeah, well, no, it's possible to mask the timestamp, but not the
IP
email. Yeah, but I'm not just talking about the IP address. The email, the to and from emails are discoverable, and the subject line. So I usually put no subject line in my encrypted emails, or you could put like Ari cat videos or something like no one is gonna think it's got suspicious content.
Yeah, because the subject is never.
Yeah.
But yeah, encryption totally works, and if you guys want, there's this thing called the surveillance self-defense.
I'm gonna talk about it. You're
Oh,
stealing my
okay.
whole presentation.
Sorry.
Can you talk a little bit about the distinction between, or maybe there is no distinction. I just, for me, the distinction between like my phone use and my computer use is very distinct because this is my phone, right? But if your phone is also where you send emails, where you send, like you're having, like there's no fun, like there's no sort of like definitional distinction. There's no like functional distinction between your phone and your computer. Like what does sort of phone tapping look like in that situation versus computer tapping? Isn't it sort of the same thing at that point?
Well, so like I said, the FBI or cops could use a stingray to wiretap everything you're doing on your smartphone. So sending emails, texts, surfing the internet, whatever, making phone calls. And then the police, if they want to go through the typical channel, which is to go to the phone company, they can get all that information from AT&T Verizon because the information is sent over AT&T's waves, and so they have access to it. If they don't have access to things like email, the FBI or the police could simply go to your email provider. Like if you have Gmail on your phone or Rise Up Mail on your phone, they would go to Gmail if they wanted the email. Does that answer your question? Okay. I should also say, things Allison is not going to say, but are really, really easy things that you can do in like 5 minutes to increase your privacy and your security is to put a little sticker over all of your webcams. So
Here's a prototype for everyone to see.
Thank you. Oh my God, you're such a wreck. So yeah, it takes about 2 seconds and it's really effective because no technology can break through the posted computer. But that's not just to protect yourself from government agents spying on you. Actually, teenagers can hack into webcams. So, you're like
Damn
naked,
teens.
sexting, whatever you're doing. I mean, even if you're just like staring at the thing like late at night with like cheeses hanging out your mouth, like you don't want people to like screenshot that. So put that over here. Yeah, put a little thing over your thing. Oh, and there are also, you're gonna talk about apps, right?
I'm not going to talk about smartphone stuff too much, but I'll talk about it a little bit at the very end, basically addressing Katie's question. And in part, the only reason I'm not talking about smartphones today is because there's just no time. And I'm trying to focus on like library environments, but I will get into some of it.
Okay, so as Kate said, I'm gonna do a walkthrough of some Know Your Rights as librarians. So this is actually, I think this may be the most optimistic I've seen you guys in this presentation. I'm not sure I'm high from. So generally, I feel like I have to come in, because it's like really scary. Like I've seen this presentation, I don't know how many times. I also work in privacy surveillance and technology, and every time after Kate's presentation, I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible, what can we do? So one of the things I like to do just at the start is to say, one of the things why we're here today, and I assume why you're here today, is notwithstanding all of the crazy shit that's happening, we are seeing real examples of things that we can do as individuals and collectively as a community that do make an actual difference. So I'm a little Pollyanna-ish right now, but I just wanted to say to you what Kade had mentioned before, the Augustine case. I think we're actually really well situated here in Massachusetts to take the lead on a lot of issues. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, when it issued this ruling in Augustine saying that you need a warrant in order to get this kind of information, we were only the second state to explicitly say that. New Jersey beat us to it, which as a native Bostonian still really hurts my feelings.
As a native New Jersey, it makes me very happy.
Should never, I really was pushing hard to have a brief that was like, you cannot be beaten by New Jersey, but we decided to have some legal argumentation in there. But as a result, both New Jersey and Massachusetts are getting cited countrywide and nationwide as examples by other advocates in other states about what they should be following, and are also really useful tools when you're agitating at the federal level for change. Because as Kade said, right now what we have applies to Massachusetts officers, but still have a different burden for federal officers. So I think in general, folks can make a really big difference. And in particular in Massachusetts, we're very well situated to be leaders so that when we make changes, not just here in the Commonwealth, but can really set a path for other folks. So that's my 5 seconds of being Pollyanna. So I think that you guys have the sheets that got passed around. And also, as Kade said, all this information is available on the blog called CSOS, and it's a downloadable PDF format, so feel free to spread far and wide. As an attorney, you're going to hear me say a lot of caveats. The first one is if you note at the bottom of that page, a lot of this information was done in conjunction with ALA, because they have great resources, and they're in the midst of right now actually overhauling some of their materials, specifically with respect to know your rights as librarians, and that should be coming out soon, so if you're interested, I know it's going to be uploaded onto their website, so you should look for that. But just if you are using this publicly, I just ask that you make sure that you attribute also to ALA, because they were instrumental in terms of getting this information, and I always like getting a shout out to the ALA as well. So as Kade said, all of us should care about privacy rights, but it is incredibly important, and I think particularly important in libraries. And I'm sure much of this is going, given that many of you are students and or librarians already, this isn't news to you. But the idea of privacy, and in particular protecting the privacy of the folks who are coming into the library, is something that's enshrined in the ALA sort of Bill of Rights. I'm just going to quote because I love it. It says it so much better than I could. In talking about the confidentiality of library records, the ALA has said that it's a core value of librarianship, and one cannot exercise the right to read if the possible consequences include damage to one's reputation, ostracism from the community or workplace, or criminal penalties. Choice requires both a varied selection and the assurance that one's choice is not monitored. And I think that's really key, right? We can provide all the choice in the world, but if folks don't think that they can be using that freely, it's not real choice. And luckily, that's something that has been recognized not only by the ALA and the librarians out there in the field, but the courts as well. The courts have really recognized that the First Amendment, which is largely recognized as free speech, it also includes the ability to get information and the ability to get that information without fear of penalty from the government. And there are lots of quotes about that. I'm just going to read one. This actually comes out of the Colorado State Court. It says, the First Amendment embraces the individual's right to purchase and read whatever books she wishes to, without fear that the government will take steps to discover which books she buys, reads, or intends to read. I think that gets at the core of the matter. I love the First Amendment, probably not surprising because I'm an ACLU attorney, but I think it's really key to note that, it's really key to note that that is something that's been recognized by the courts as well. So I'm going to walk through some particular specific scenarios that you may face as librarians, but I want to, and what there are different steps that you can do in each of them. First and foremost, this is the second caveat of the day. All of the information that I'm giving you is generally speaking. It's very difficult and impossible as a lawyer to give you case-specific advice without actually knowing the facts at hand. So this is general information that you should take, but if there's one thing you come away from this, it is that we love librarians at the ACLU. We love getting calls from librarians at the ACLU. And so if you are facing any of the scenarios that I talked about or anything else that you have questions about with respect to law enforcement, please give us a call. I have my card here, I think Kate has her card here too. I'm happy to give that out, and we really mean that you should give us a call, but it's really important because whenever you're facing a specific instance, you need to get legal advice that's tailored to that instance. But these will help give you some ground rules just so you can understand the lay of the land, and hopefully that will be useful to you. There are also just some broad, I'm going to give you specific scenarios, but some broad categories of things that I think will be useful across the board, regardless of the scenario that you are going to be facing, are the following. If you don't make the records, and if you don't keep the records, there's nothing that you are going to have to turn over. So if there is probably I can give you lots of information about what the law can do to protect you, but first and foremost, there are actual practical things, and Alison's going to get into this as well. But if the records don't exist, they can't force you to make them. So if there's one thing that you can be putting into place to protect the privacy of folks who are coming in, it's either don't keep records at all or have very strict retention policies that really purges very quickly those records, because you're not going to be under any legal obligation to create something that doesn't already exist. So it's a really easy and clear thing that you can be doing to protect the privacy of folks who are coming into your library. The second thing, yes?
But how do you do that? Because, I mean, we're constantly being told you have to have the data. How many people take books out? You know, what kind of books are they taking out? Keeping records is part of how we get books into our libraries, how we, you know, get our budgets made. Librarians keep records.
Right, so I think one thing, first of all, everything you're doing is going to have to be within the context of the policy of your library, but I think one critical thing is, at least with respect to some of the things that you were just saying, that's about broad categories, right? Just general numbers that doesn't have to be attached to any individual person. You can say, you know, we know that there were 550 people who came in the month of December to the library. I don't know who those people are, I don't know their names, but I know that those are what the numbers are. Similarly, with respect to books, you can keep information about how often a book has been taken out without connecting that to an individual. And so to the degree that you're not just anonymizing the data, but actually not having data that connects it to any person at all, but still keeping information about what you care about, whether that be foot traffic in or books that are taken out, there are ways that you can do that that's disconnected from the individual consumer that would still be protecting their privacy.
You recommend a program for that?
If there's practical information, Alison will be able to speak to that more.
Specifically, for which kinds of records?
Well, I'm just, you know, I'm just thinking, you know, I take library classes here and they're, you know, constantly saying if you want to get your budget for the next year, you have to know how many kids.
Of course, yeah,
that
those are
sign up.
numbers, right? It's not personally identifiable
Right,
information.
right.
For example, the patron authentication software we use in Watertown, we're part of Minuteman.
Right. Great
uh,
library.
Thank you. So, you know, our ILS does not keep records of patron checkouts. Once the book has been checked back in, if there are fines attached, then you can identify it, or if it's overdue. But as soon as it's checked in, it's ephemeral, it's wiped from the record. Likewise, our patron authentication software only keeps the logs of the library cards for 1 day. So like Jesse said, you know, if you have to keep that data for anything, consider what your data retention policy is. You know, if you have to retain data that identifies someone, make it a matter of days or weeks instead of months and years. So, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please, you guys should feel free to ask questions throughout. So data retention, and the second piece is having a clear plan of action in place prior to any sort of engagement with law enforcement is going to be extremely useful. You know, it's understandably sometimes really stressful when you have a police officer or an FBI officer standing in front of you. And if there already are some really clear guidelines of, you know, for example, when law enforcement comes in, this is the person I need to go to, whether it's the director, whether there's a particular reference librarian who has all of that information, having literally just an org chart of this is what I do when someone comes in and is asking for records, and having that information disseminated to everyone working in your office, I think is a really important tool to make sure that when, it's great to have plans, but if it's not disseminated and people don't know about it beforehand, it's really difficult to implement it in the moment. So forward thinking can be a really useful tool in that regard. So with that sort of upfront stuff, what are some different scenarios that folks might encounter in the library? So the first one, this is kind of going to be stepping up. The first instances, and we get these calls all the time, are police officers coming in from off the street and without any paper on their persons, nothing official from a court, and simply saying, you know what, we really want to know what Alison has taken out this past month. And we're municipal employees, you're municipal employees. If you do us a solid, you just give us this information. And understandably, again, lots of folks, if you all are working for a particular city or town, like you know these people, you're all city employees, they may come in super friendly, like, you are under absolutely no obligation to turn over information in that situation. And you can do so politely. You can say, no, I understand. They may try to tell you, we care about security. Don't you care about security? We care about crime. Don't you care about crime? And you can say, we are similarly really concerned about security and crime. We also really care about privacy. And so if this is an investigation you're doing, we'd be happy to speak with you if you get a warrant from the court. We can talk about it then. But without some sort of official documentation, we're not required to hand anything over. And in fact, would be violative of the rights of our patrons here. We're not going to do that. What I will say is, I always sort of give this as a warning, you are under no obligation to hand over records, and we would encourage you to tell the police officer that you are under no obligation to hand over those records. If they continue to insist, and they're going to physically take, like, let's say, for example, because we've had this scenario, they want to take a particular computer because they want to know what the logs are and who's been using it, and they go physically to take it. We would recommend that you not physically block them unless you want to get arrested. If you do get arrested, you should feel free to give us a call. However, in that instance, at the end of the day, if they are going to physically take it after you've explained to them that you're not consenting, and they say, well, that's great, but I'm the one with the gun and I'm going to take this right now. We recommend that, just to let you know, if you do physically block them in that scenario, the likelihood is you are going to be arrested. And we can talk to you about that afterwards if you want, but we don't encourage you to do that without knowing that sort of a potential. But what we would say is, if they're still going to take it, making very clearly stated on the record that you're not consenting to what they're about to do. If they want to take a particular computer, if they want to take particular files, say, I understand that you're taking this, we're not consenting to this seizure right now. Ideally, if you could have another witness there, and again, this is where sort of an org chart of this is what we should do if police officers come in would be useful. One librarian is the person who's interacting with the officer, another librarian is there to take notes that will then be dated to get on the records in some capacity that you're not consenting to the seizure. And the reason why this is important is, there's a reason why warrants exist. They exist to protect the rights of the patrons, for sure, but they also actually exist to be helpful to the government, because ultimately what they're doing is actually a legitimate investigation, and let's say it ends up coming to court and there's a criminal trial. They're going to want to introduce evidence. And the way that they can do that with respect to something that they've seized from the library is to say, look, we went to the court and the judge said we had the right to take this, and we took it and it had this evidence, and now we want to present it to the jury. If they're coming in without a warrant, one of the things that can happen if you don't consent to the search is the individual patron can say, look, this information that was seized about me, it was entirely unlawful. There was no judge involved, there was no neutral magistrate involved, they just came in and took it, and you shouldn't be able to use this information in a trial against me. And that's a very useful tool to be able to have. It's important. We have rules for a reason. Police officers tell us that all the time. There are also rules that they need to follow, and this is one of them. If you consent to a search, though, consent is something that sort of absolves the police officers from needing to get anything else. If you have consented to a search, you don't need a warrant. You don't need anything else. So that's why it's really important as librarians that if police officers come to the library, if you told them that you don't want, that they can't get this information without a warrant, they say they're still going to take it, still be very clear that what they're doing is over your objections and you're not consenting to the search, because that could be important later on down the line. So, second scenario, police officer comes in and they have a warrant on their person. And they say, hey, I have this warrant, it says that I can get the records for Alison and what she has taken out over the past 3 months. We really want this information. What do you do? Warrants are documents that are signed by a court. What happens is the prosecutor would have to go to a judge and say, look, we have probable cause to believe that this particular piece of evidence that we want to get is going to show evidence of a crime. And a judge looks at all the information, and if the judge agrees that there is actual probable cause, which is one of those terms of art, it's about sort of the level of information they need to satisfy as the government. If they agree, then they will sign a warrant that says, yes, you have our authorization to go in and get this particular piece of information. It will be signed by the judge, and they will then hand it over. valid warrant means that they can get that information right then and there. The warrant, once it is served, that gives them the authorization to get the information at that particular time. My first recommendation would be, if you get a warrant from a police officer, say, can I give this to my legal counsel? Now, it's an important place to pause, because for a lot of folks, depending on the size of your town or city, your library, your corporation council, if it's a city or municipal council, may also be representing the police officers. We've had that as a potential conflict of interest. So this is yet another great plug for give the ACLU a call, because we do not represent the police officers, but we do love librarians, and we would love to take your call. So you can always call us if that's a scenario that you're facing, but you should ask the police officers if you have the opportunity to show it to your legal counsel before you actually have to comply with it. They can say no. It's not something that they automatically have to do. It would be the nice thing to do and the proper thing to do, but they're not required to give you the time. If they do not, there are things that you can look for, however, on the warrant. So things to look for on a warrant are, is it dated? Is it still current? Most warrants have a time limit on them. Is it signed by a judge that's either from a state court or a local court, or a federal court that's from this jurisdiction, so from Massachusetts? And what is the narrow band of records that it is asking for? Warrants are not sort of a free-for-all, for you to just come through and take everything that you want. A warrant for Alison's records would not then allow them to get warrants for everybody in this room. And one of the requirements that prosecutors need to do is when they go to a judge, they need to be particular and specific about the records that they are asking for. So there should be limits about the records that they're asking for. So if you look at the warrant and all of those things, it checks out. Our next recommendation would be make sure you are only providing the narrow band of records that are listed on that warrant. And again, this is where it comes into play that having a plan in place beforehand is really useful, because there should be someone in your office, whether that be an IT or one of the reference librarians or the director, who's actually pulling those records and giving it to the police officer. We do not recommend allowing the police officer to say, hey, can we just go, if this is where your IT is, if this is where all the records are, can we just go through and pull these records? No. Pull out the records that they have the authorization to get. Do not give them anything above and beyond what those narrow parameters are, and that's the warrant served. So that is the warrant scenario. Okay. Third scenario. Instead of a local cop, you have a federal officer who's coming in and they have something called a national security letter. Folks in this room, have any of you have heard of NSLs or national security letters? Okay. So national security letters are part of the Nasty Patriot Act. And essentially, they serve largely like a warrant. They'll describe certain records that the officer standing in front of you would want to get. But they are not in any way, shape, or form signed off on by the judge. This is a big problem. It's actually just written by the FBI or NSA or other that is signing off on these letters for you to be able to have those records. And this is really important because the whole point of a warrant is that you should have a neutral magistrate. The person who's asking for the records should not also say whether or not they've satisfied the requirement for those records. I think about it like when I was 5 and I wanted a cookie. If I was the person who had to decide, like, I want a cookie. Well, have you had your vegetables today? No, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to have a cookie. Awesome. Go to the cookie jar. Like, that's essentially what the NSL is. But as of right now, that is still something that is constitutional here. So if you get the NSL, here are things that you should be looking for. I should say, the other thing that's really problematic about national security letters is they have something called a gag rule. And this gag rule will probably say in very scary terms, you are not to tell anyone that you have received this national security letter. Folks in this room, have you heard of something called a warrant canary? Okay, we're going to talk about that in a second. So there are these gag rules, which is really scary because, for example, if you get a warrant, a regular warrant from a local police officer, and then let's say a reporter is looking into how many warrants have you received from your local municipal police department to give over records, you could then say, oh, we've received 5 warrant requests for records over the past month, and that seems like it's a pretty high spike. The national security letter, because they have these gags, it says very specifically you're not allowed to talk about the fact that you have received that letter. It's really important to know, though, there are 2 exceptions to that gag rule. The courts have signed off on this. One is you're allowed to tell anyone in your library that is going to be required to help you turn over those records. So let's say you're the librarian that's working at the front desk, but you don't, and they come to you and they're asking a question about IT. You don't have the capability to do that on your own. You're not violating the national security letter by going to talk to folks in IT. You're allowed to do that. The second, very, very key, and this will probably not surprise about the fact that you received a national security letter. So again, if you get a national security letter, please call the ACLU and talk to an attorney because it's really, really important. Other than that, the NSL works very similarly to a warrant. It is something that needs to be served at that time. So when they show up, they can get those records. It should be describing very specifically the kinds of records that they're looking for, and you should only be providing that narrow band of records to them. Oh, the other really critical thing is national security letters could only be given to you by a federal officer. You should not be receiving an NSL from a local police officer. If you do, it's not an NSL. So make sure that the person you're receiving it from is actually a federal officer. Warrant canaries, I can talk about this in more detail if folks are interested, but it's something that some libraries have started doing. So essentially what it is folks have started putting out signs that say, we have not received a national security letter, because you're under no obligation to say that you haven't received a national security letter. And then if they had received one, they would take it down.
Folks might be familiar with Jessamine West doing this. She made one like right around the time the Patriot Act came out that said the FBI has not been there, watch closely for this sign to be removed, and she put it on her blog. She's actually credited with having one of the first like visible warrant canaries anywhere. So anyway.
The sort of legality and application of warrant canaries are still being debated, but it's a really interesting idea. Libraries have been one of the folks that are really taking the lead on this, so if you're interested in that, we can give you some sites and you can look into it, but it's really interesting. So that's national security letters. The last category that I'm going to talk to you about is something called subpoenas, and there are both regular subpoenas and administrative subpoenas. These could be coming from either federal officials or from local officials. And they're different from warrants, again, insofar as subpoenas can actually be issued by a court. They sometimes are also issued by a grand jury. Administrative subpoenas we'll get to in a second. But the key difference between subpoenas and warrants is they don't have to be served immediately. So you don't have to comply with a subpoena the moment that you get it. So if an officer comes in and they have a subpoena, you can say, thank you very much. I see here that I have 30 days to comply with this. We'll be sure to get back to you after we've had a chance to talk to our legal counsel. So this is a time where you can say, I'm going to take this and go talk to an attorney about it. Have a nice day and send them on your way. And we really recommend that you do that because there are subpoenas, there are lots of different things you can do to look at it to make sure that it is valid. And if it's not, an attorney can do something called filing a motion to quash the subpoena, which in addition to allowing attorneys to say fun words like quash, is great because it means that if the subpoena actually doesn't satisfy all the different requirements, you can make it go away before having to hand over any records. So the types of things your attorney, or us, would be looking at are what is the breadth of the subpoena? Is it overly broad? Are they asking for all of the records for everyone in this room for the past year? It's going to be pretty hard to convince a court that that's actually necessary for any kind of investigation. Is it still timely? Has it already passed expired? And did the proper authority actually sign off on it? So subpoenas give you that wiggle room to actually have the time to go and talk with an attorney, and I highly recommend that you do so because there are some subpoenas that are served that are not valid and documents don't have to be handed over as a result. If you do ultimately end up complying with a subpoena, it will be very similar to a warrant, and again, you want to be very careful to just provide what it's narrowly asking for. So the final category of subpoenas are something called administrative subpoenas, and that's something that I don't know actually how they operate in other states, but in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is a very specific type of subpoena that is similar to an NSL, except it's sort of even one step removed because it's not even a federal officer, it's a local DA. As far as these subpoenas, administrative subpoenas, don't go to a judge. They don't go to a grand jury. It is something that is issued by a district attorney's office, so a prosecutor's office, and it's a letter that's asking for certain kinds of material. Now, in general, administrative subpoenas shouldn't be asking for content, but they can be asking for some of that metadata that Kade was talking about earlier. And this is important for libraries because a lot of libraries provide internet services. So if you're acting as an ISP in any way for your patrons, and they could be sending you administrative subpoenas to find out about if you're providing email services, if you're providing internet services, what is the actual addresses that folks are using. And the reason why this is problematic, again, is because you don't have a neutral magistrate that's looking at it. And actually in Massachusetts, we've had certain instances where legal secretaries have been signing off on them. They're not actually even the DAs. And again, the whole, like leaving the 5-year-old in charge of making a decision about cookies play here because if the prosecutors themselves were looking for this information, they're also the ones who are signing the administrative subpoenas. One of the reasons why the ACLU is really concerned about administrative subpoenas is because there are certain DA's offices which have included gag language, gag order rule language into these letters, similar to what you would see in an NSL. So you are not to tell anyone that you have received this administrative subpoena. We've actually seen examples where that not is capitalized, bolded, and underlined, in case you didn't get the emphasis. They really, really want you to know that you can't do this. The interesting thing about this is, as much as we have problems with the national security letter gag rules, the gag rules and administrative subpoena have absolutely no grounding in law. There's not a statute that authorizes them to do that. There's not a regulation that authorizes them to do that. There's no case law that authorizes them to do that. They've just, these particular DAs have decided that they can do that. We think that's deeply problematic. So please, 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 if you get an administrative subpoena in general, but certainly if you get an administrative subpoena with a gag rule, you should give us a call, because it's a big problem that we're facing in this state. Administrative subpoenas, we've tried to, Kade sent a whole suite of public records requests to find out about how administrative subpoenas have been operating in the state, because we've been told by law enforcement that these are really important crime-fighting tools. Well, if it's a really important crime-fighting tool, you should be able to tell us, how many arrests have this led to, how many convictions has it led to, what kind of crime-fighting are you doing with it? And the vast majority of districts came back to us and said, either we don't keep this information, full stop, or we keep it but it's secret, so you can't know about it, but trust us. And those are not good answers, and it seems like that's a waste of tax dollars, and we should be able to know what kind of tools our law enforcement are using, and be able to judge for ourselves whether or not it's effective. And maybe once we got the data, some folks would think it was effective, and then they could make a decision based on that. But at least that would be based on information. And more likely than not, they would get the information and say, you know what, this seems like it's a massive waste of resources and also a pretty troubling use of secrecy in our system, and we don't want it anymore. But either way, at least that information should be made public. So if you're getting administrative subpoenas, please do give us a call. And again, they operate like regular subpoenas insofar as you don't have to respond to them right away no matter what. So you do have that timeline. You shouldn't have a problem with it. So a lot of dry legal information, but at least with gesticulations. So
And enthusiasm.
Exactly. Do folks have questions? They answer everything.
I don't know if you can answer this. Can you give us an example of a case that you helped out with here locally in Massachusetts?
Yes, we had, so we had a librarian who called us because she was facing a situation where the cops did come in. They said that they needed to get the computer. It was in the midst of, there was a missing, they said there was a missing child, and they wanted to find out where they were, and they believed that the student had been, one of the last places they'd been was in the library, and they wanted to get access to their computers to get the logs. And she said, that's fine, but you need to get a warrant to be able to do so, and they said, no, it's really important. Oh, I'm actually so glad you asked this question. It's a really important exception for folks to know about. They said, no, it's really important, we need to get it right now. There's an exception to the warrant requirement called exigent circumstances. Is that a term some folks maybe have heard? Essentially what it means is, oh, holy shit, we need this right now. But it's often police officers will use it in a much more broad way than the courts will actually sign off on. What exigent circumstances are really meant to cover are situations like a cop is chasing someone who robbed a bank, like think of a cartoon character, right? Just robbed a bank, they're running down the street, the cartoon character runs into a house and the cop sees them do it. Normally to enter someone else's home, you need to get a warrant. The cop was in the middle of pursuing a suspect, they saw them rob the bank, they saw them run into the house, they can enter that home without a warrant in order to apprehend the suspect. That's the level of, oh, holy shit, we're talking about. That's the technical legal term. It is not, it's really a pain to have to go to the court and we kind of just want it right now, can't you give it to us? Which is the way it sometimes gets used by police officers. So in that instance, what she said to them was, look, and I have to tell you, it doesn't take that long to get a warrant. I only wish that the warrant requirement was as high of a burden as police officers sometimes say it is. It's really not. If it's a legitimate investigation, courts will give them a warrant and it doesn't take that much time. It really, really doesn't. So in that instance, she said you need to get a warrant. The problem was the board did not end up backing her up. And they did ultimately end up taking their computers. But she did stand up to them, and she said she wasn't consenting to it at a time. And one of the reasons why that was it was useful because she felt like she couldn't talk to corporate counsel, and she was talking to us because there was that conflict between the corporate counsel also representing the police officers and us.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
So while police have too many resources compared to libraries, they don't have unlimited resources. And so if someone in your library or someone you know thinks that forcing police to actually get a warrant is a bad idea, like you don't care about public safety or something like that, you should tell them what our former colleague at the ACLU, who used to be an FBI agent, tells us, which is really smart, which is that when he was an FBI agent, the warrant requirement didn't just protect the public's privacy and the right not to be spied on by agents unless they had good reason to believe those people were involved in a crime. The warrant requirement also actually helped him as an investigator do his job better, he said, because when he had to actually have evidence to show to a judge that someone was involved in criminal activity, he didn't waste his time following up investigations and leads that went nowhere. So it actually, requiring law enforcement to get warrants to spy on people actually helps police do their jobs better and prevents the kinds of abuse that likely go on all over the country when they don't need warrants. So it's not just a privacy issue, it's also frankly better for public safety.
This isn't something you covered. I'm kind of curious about it, and I don't know to what degree you can talk about it, but the requirements for things like data from surveillance cameras on, like, attached to the library building, or like the sort of physical sanctity or security of the library building itself, and like what kinds of rights people have sort of within libraries, and what kinds of rights police have to kind of police a library, I guess.
So with respect to surveillance cameras, and Kate touched on this briefly, I know I've talked to a lot of librarians who have talked about using surveillance cameras because they've been concerned about books being, like, literally just books getting taken from their shelves, and that was one of the ways they were using surveillance cameras. By and large, the ACLU thinks that surveillance does not decrease crime, and we're concerned about it, but I know that that's a decision that's being made in individual libraries. What I would say is retention policy is key. If surveillance cameras are there to see if a book was stolen, that's something that could be reviewed that day and or reviewed at the end of the week and then erased immediately. So retention policies is going to be, and having clear and explicit retention policies is something that's really critical when we're talking about cameras. Having really clear policies about access to those cameras is also important. I actually have heard, at least anecdotally, of some surveillance cameras in libraries that have a direct feed into police stations. I would highly, highly recommend to your libraries not to do that. There's really no need, and I think it's deeply troubling on a whole host of different levels with respect to privacy of your patrons. So don't do that, please. And if you, in addition to that, having really clear, explicit policies about when can police officers actually access, police officers or any other third party for that matter, have access to that surveillance camera and footage is going to be important. With respect to access to it in general, the same rules would apply to the surveillance camera records as any other kind of record. If the police come in and say that they want to look at it, they would have to get a warrant or have proof of exigent circumstances, and in that latter case, don't consent, because it should be up to the court to decide whether or not those existed. So I would recommend not having surveillance cameras, but if you do have surveillance cameras, there's some really key things that you can do to make sure that they're being used in the most limited way possible. With respect to rights in the library, so there's a couple of different sort of pieces with that. First, one of the issues that we see quite often is when people have like a public meeting space. How does that get made available to different groups? Can you exclude different groups? Public libraries, once you choose to make a meeting place, like if you, I know, so I grew up in Needham, and in the public library, it's my library growing up, and we had like one of those big rooms in the back that you could use for public meetings, and they made it available, and there was a schedule. Once choose to do that, you've made that a public forum. And that means that you can have reasonable with restrictions, time, place, and manner restrictions is the term that the courts generally use. For example, you can make sure that you don't have 5 groups meeting there at once. You can have a first come, first serve way to sign up. However, if you choose to make that room available for meetings, you can't just make it available to the groups you like. And you have to have, if you're having like political groups there, both parties need to have access to it, and third parties and independent parties. If you have groups that are advocacy groups, both pro and anti, will be able to have access to that room. So if you have public meeting space in your library, and again, a lot of these cases end up coming down to nuances, so if you have questions about public meeting spaces, I recommend sort of, we can talk about specific examples one-on-one, but just as a general caveat, if there is a room in your library that is available for public meetings, you need to be really careful that you're not discriminating in terms of who has access to that space, because it's become a public forum that First Amendment rights are going to attach to.
Does that then mean that anybody, that the group that is reserving that room can't exclude anybody from attending?
So, yes, barring disruption. So you can have, you know, like let's say the pro-choice group wants to hold a meeting in the library. They can't actually say only pro-choice, people who hold pro-choice views are going to be able to have access to this meeting. And if you're an anti-choice person, you don't have access to it. They're not, it's a public forum, they can't do that. All of the regular rules with respect to disruption and noise level within a library would still apply. So someone can't come and start being physically violent or too loud, but they wouldn't be able to exclude people from having access to it.
Typically, this is outlined in a policy. At Watertown, for example, you have to check a box when you reserve a meeting room that says, this meeting is free and open to any member of the public. And if you don't check it, you can't complete the registration form.
I know this is sort of like a hypothetical, attached to a hypothetical, but like if a known,
It's a meta hypothetical.
but if a known undercover cop is showing up at an organizing meeting for like Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter organizing meeting reserved, does that, can they say this is disruptive, we will not allow you into our meeting?
So you can't end up, another piece of the First Amendment. First Amendment has it's like really interesting because I go to different groups and depending on the topic that I'm talking about, like some people don't know that the First Amendment has the religious clauses, and then if I go and talk to religious groups, they don't know that it has the free speech clauses. So there are lots of different things that are encompassed in this one amendment. With respect to free speech, an additional piece of that is the right to association, which folks might be familiar with or not. Essentially what that says is that you have a constitutional right to be protected to express your political views, participate in political activities, and not have that right chilled by the government. And one of the things that means to be able to not believe you're going to be surveilled as a result of your political beliefs. And there was a Supreme Court case about this, and the ACLU of Button, and it talks about not having to a political group not having, or an advocacy group not having to disclose its membership list for that purpose. Because the idea being is the right to associate means nothing, very similar to the right to privacy and the right to read, right? The right to associate, to be free to associate means nothing if you think, yeah, you have a free right to associate, but you're then going to be on the list from the government, they're going to be able to make your life hell in a lot of different ways as a result of that. So that your scenario sort of implicates that, and it's something that we saw with Occupy, for example, all the time, that you would have these large protests, and then the cops would use all sorts of things, including stingrays, we believe, in order to get information about folks who were in that crowd. So that aspect of it would be problematic if they were serving in their official capacity. If they are not, and there's an individual, technically a cop who's off duty, would have a right to attend, but right, exactly. So this is why the nuances would end up being important, but there are troubling aspects and potentially legally troubling aspects of the scenario.
But this thing you're talking about only pertains to public libraries.
Yes.
This does not pertain to private spaces.
Yeah, because everything I'm talking about with respect to access is because you're a government, the Constitution is applying. Constitution applies to government and public actors. If you're in a private library, that's a whole different story.
Ban anyone for any or no reason at all, right? Basically.
But you should, it's a different story. But yeah, from a constitutional perspective, okay.
Oh, sorry. No.
Go ahead.
So the recommendations that you gave for warrants and all that, does that also apply to working in an academic library? And someone brings in a warrant, same thing?
Yeah, so the Constitution, with respect, when I'm talking about what the government has the right to do, the restrictions on the government are going to apply irrespective of the body that they're serving it on. So their job to get a warrant, their job to make sure that the judge has actually signed off on it, that applies regardless of who they're taking it to. The one thing I will say is if you're in a public school library to which FERPA is applying, so student records are applying. So FERPA has some requirements with respect to parents need to be able to have access to some records if they want to have access to them. So if you're in like a K through 12 library setting, FERPA may interact with some of that, but that doesn't and shouldn't impact what the government is going to be able to come in and access. It just adds like another complicating letter with respect to what other parties are going to have access to the documents. Yes.
I know that some libraries, I'm thinking about, did you also have your hand raised? I'm sorry.
Nope.
Okay. DC, I think they do hire cops to do security at the front, like, desk. If it's not cops, it's certainly people with guns, and uniforms, so I'm just trying to remember it in my head. But like,
Washington, D.C.
yeah. What is the, I mean, this all sort of presupposes that cops are not in the building and are coming in. What if cops are sort of like a presence in the building already? And I kind of feel like, I'm not sure that it changes anything legally in terms of the information that they need, but in terms of like sort of where cops, like whether somebody who is acting as security or sort of like, I don't know, some sort of like monitor, like what kind of rights they have like within the space and within the building. I know that's really vague, but I think especially for big city libraries, I see this like overlap between security and cops, and then security and cops and libraries. So especially for like heavily policed, like, you know, Black and brown communities in urban spaces, like what does that kind of look like?
So I'm going to answer what I think your question is, but if I'm
not
like
sure what my question is, so
off,
sure, go for it.
if I go astray, feel free to stop me.
Yeah.
So I think there are lots of different pieces to that. One overarching issue that we're facing, not just in libraries but across the board, is the privatization of police forces and the police forceization of private security. If that makes any sense. It's a word.
Yeah.
Glad that's on tape. So it's a real problem, especially when you have so if you have private security guards that are being deputized in some way, and they have some to what degree are they actually a part of the police force? To what degree are they actually separate security? That becomes a problem with respect to liability. Like who, let's say they do something crazy and go rogue, because security officers never do that. Then who do you hold responsible? Is it the police department that deputized them? Is it the private security agency that is employing them? So that's sort of just an overarching privatization of police forces is actually a really big problem in a lot of cities in particular, and raises a whole host of additional issues. Separate from that, police also, in terms of any sort of engagement that they're going to have with an individual, like a patron, you're going to need to have individualized suspicion for them to detain and or to search and or to have any other sort of interaction with that patron, regardless of whether or not they've been asked by the library to be there. That's something that is going to apply because that person has Fourth Amendment rights, right? The Fourth Amendment that protects your right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. So if the police have been asked to be on the outside by the library, for example, because of security reasons, I think that it's problematic with respect to sort of chilling effect that that's going to have, and it's a policy matter, we can talk about that, but with respect to the interactions they're going to have with the individual patrons who are coming in and out, those same constitutional rights are still going to apply to them. They have even if the library asks them to be there, unless those cops have individualized suspicion with respect to a particular patron, they can ask questions of that patron, but the patron can say, am I being detained? And the cop, unless they have individualized suspicion, would have to say no, and they can walk away. So I don't know if that gets
I would like to say something in
Yeah.
response to that. Y'all are like future library directors of America, right? Don't have cops in
Yeah.
your libraries.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible idea.
And if you work at a library where there are cops, talk to the director and tell her that it's not a safe space for Black youth who are routinely terrorized by police. Get them out of the library. That's,
So what is the distinction then between police and library security?
Well,
What do you mean, what is
do they have arrest power? Do they carry weapons?
Yeah, private security, I mean, if you're not, you can't, I can't just go arrest people. Not effectively. Private security, I also don't think you should have private security officers in your library, but with respect to the power of the state that allows officers to arrest folks, and that's where the deputization ends up also coming into play, but.
Yeah, I mean, like, are there serious, like, security threats at libraries or something? Are there?
Depends on the branch, I think.
Yeah, it depends on the location.
I mean, one of the questions that we get more often is in libraries calling us when there's a specific incident. So if there's an individual who's been coming into the library that they feel has been disruptive, they want to know what should we be doing, is there a policy we should have in place, can we call the police in this situation? By and large, I mean, the answer you're almost always going to get from us at least is if there is an opportunity to be doing something that does not involve the police, we would highly recommend that because there's just no reason to increase the police force presence in the library. And if you are imposing policies, it's something you need to be very careful as a library that it is something that's being imposed equally across the board. You can't have targeted policies that's just going to impact one person. So be careful that you're not discriminating against anyone because that.
Yeah, because if we find out, we'll sue y'all ass.
I guess where I'm coming from this is that I do see this as like a continuum of different kinds of surveillance and different ways that, certain bodies are surveilled, and I think that it's important to sort of, establish that, certain bodies in our society and our communities are being surveilled constantly in ways that others are not. So like this, the sort of, privacy laws and things are really terrifying for people who maybe never have undergone surveillance, but, there are, certain communities of activists, of people of color, things like that who have been experiencing, kinds of state surveillance and terrorism, constantly since they've been who they are. You know what I mean? I've not been
Now
very
they're
articulate
experiencing
right now.
even more.
Right, exactly. So I'm trying to figure out like how we can make librarians think of privacy and surveillance as being something that is not new, that has always been the case and has different manifestations, on a sort of technological level and on a sort of person-to-person level. So like having sort of, I feel like it'd be really useful to have like concrete library security, like a sort of like library security recommendations for how libraries should exist in communities and, establish the security of their patrons, establish the security of their information, and sort of like a sort of positive like bill of rights around that instead of like what not to do in certain situations, because I feel like there are often libraries who, like you and I have talked about Watertown and like people dealing with patrons who might be disruptive or something like that. If libraries' first instinct is to call the local cop, that is immediately, or if the cop is already there, and I feel like giving libraries another model for how to actually interact in this non-antagonistic way with the communities that they're serving is really important. And I guess maybe what I'm trying to do is ask then what are some sort of positive recommendations around like security in this nebulous way that either libraries need to sort of change the way they think about it, and then actively like what they can do to ensure patron security in not just a technological way, but in an actual physical safety way.
Yeah, same with unattended children policy. A lot of libraries have a policy that if there's unattended kids left just dumped at the library and library's closing, like it's not the librarian's responsibility to stay there and take care of them.
Yeah, you are required to call the police in order to
depending on
protect
your
the child.
policy, like just call the cops and they can come pick them up. And like that's terrifying, especially for Black and brown youth. Like
right, so like
that's not a safe place for them to go either.
yeah, so kind of like interrupting this like really cushy relationship that libraries and police have slowly been developing in other ways that are not just that sort of privacy piece, because I feel like that is the sort of easiest piece for really privileged people to think about and is also really important, right? But is also not the only sort of way.
I have something to share on that front, something that Watertown has been doing, and I've seen done in a even more concerted way in some other libraries, where we've, instead of, you know, having this like ad hoc relationship with the police whenever there's an issue with a patron, and possibly, you know, introducing a traumatic element to that patron or to the rest of the library, because we know that police have a traumatic effect on particularly Black and brown people. What we've done instead is build a relationship with our social resource specialist in town, who is a social worker who has come in and done training on de-escalation for our staff, on tactics that we can use, and so, you know, helping us to like have the resources on our own to help the, you know, the patrons who might be having a little bit more of a difficult time, or those patrons who maybe are, you know, presenting a situation that could be unsafe for other people, you know, trying to figure out what we can do on our own without introducing any police element, and then like, you know, using, like, we still haven't figured out, you know, what to do as the sort of last resort other than calling the police, but I certainly think it's helped tremendously to say, okay, instead of just immediately picking up the phone as soon as someone seems like, you know, they might be in a, they're being disruptive to a point where we want them to leave or need them to leave, or we're worried about the safety of other people, there are other things that we can do. And so we've built this relationship with a social resource specialist. Another library, the San Francisco Public Library, has a full-time social worker at the library. And that person is there for, you know, not just helping staff with resources to deal with disruptive patrons, but she's there to help patrons too. She's available to patrons. So, you know, it's sort of creating this culture of, you know, like de-escalation and like internal kind of like resource sharing or whatever. And I think it's been extremely helpful at Watertown. I mean, I don't have any statistics on it, but I know that I've noticed in my colleagues, like, they are much less likely to call the police. I mean, anecdotally, that has just happened immediately. I don't know what it's like in San Francisco, but I would imagine the same is true.
I would say, I mean, I talked with libraries also where I know that they, like, the cops will sort of just drop by and have these conversations with librarians being like, oh, like, you know, we're right across the way in case you need any information, or like, we know that you're concerned about security, so we just wanted you to know, like, you can give us a call at any time. And I think having some of those policies in place, like Alison said, and having really explicit conversations about that that's not something that folks want to do, because I think some of that soft touch approach has actually been one of the ways that we've seen officers getting more access. And again, sort of similar to consent with search and seizure, when they're getting invited in by the libraries themselves, it sort of allows a lot more opportunities than would be happening otherwise. But I think it's really important to speak with individual librarians about that as well, because I think some of, depending on where they grew up, what their interactions with police officers have been beforehand, their knee-jerk response might be like, oh, that's great, you care about security too, like, you should come on in, and being really, again, having some of those conversations and having really explicit policies so that everyone is on the same page is really important.
I would also, can I just suggest that, I mean, this is, I think you've highlighted something really important, and obviously there's a huge lack of resources for librarians who are social justice oriented and want to think about, you know, something more like restorative justice instead of always calling the cops. So you should make this.
I guess I just, you know, I work as I look around the room and I look around at Simmons, and it's, you know, primarily white people who have not had the same adversarial relationship with cops as, you know, as Black and brown people have. And if you're serving a community that has, you know, been, you know, if you're serving a community of color, if you're serving an underserved community, which as a library you probably are to some degree, you know, you simply have no idea what havoc the cops can wreak on somebody's life or on somebody's community. So like having that easy one-to-one relationship, you know, is just not going to mean the same thing for you as it will the person who you're calling the cops on. And I think we don't talk about that ever, and it terrifies me, because it terrifies me for the people who we're going to be serving.
Right, because it's much far beyond a privacy issue at that point. I mean, you know, if if we want to have our libraries be welcoming spaces, and we don't understand the relationship that many of our patrons have with the police, and what we're doing to the safety of that space for those people by introducing the police into it. I mean, we're basically telling people that they're not welcome in the library because the police are there, you know, and that is really scary. And it's not just police presence, you know, think about how many libraries, I mean, there's like, I wish that there was time to like go into things like this in our presentation, but like having surveillance cameras in the parking lot, you know, not just the security force that's maybe in the library, but like what other kind of police surveillance are you enabling, you know? Or that your director did and didn't ask any of the staff.
DC Public Library is, you know, hugely popular with like homeless people or people who are sort of like, you know, transient or, you know, partially homeless or whatever. And, you know, because mentally ill people are overrepresented in that population, because drug users are, you know, overrepresented in that population, there is stuff happening that, you know, surveillance is really easy to turn into ways to criminalize these people. And it's just really scary to see these connections like not being made.
Yeah, and you know, I guess the other issue is that as public space increasingly shrinks, libraries are really the only place for some people to go, right? And so yeah, what you just said is so true. It often is the most vulnerable people who end up seeking refuge really in libraries, and I think there's a huge danger that if the kinds of, if librarians and library schools don't teach people to think about these issues critically, and there isn't work done, I mean, people need to be writing about this stuff. You should be reading things about this in library school, and, you know, I hope that you guys will change the culture to make it so, you know, we can't do everything. So, you gotta help.
What if I like donate?
Yeah, we'll do more, but.
Okay.
No, this is great, and I mean, you and I have had many conversations like this. Katie and I are friends in real life.
As opposed to this, which is fake life.
This is not actual friends. You know, one thing that I'm trying to do with the project that I started, Library Freedom Project, is not just, you know, this workshop is great, and we've been really fortunate to spread it all around Massachusetts and other places. But clearly, there are many other parts of this conversation that we need to be having. This is really only the scratching the surface of it, you know. So I encourage people to email me. My email is on the board right here. And like, we can continue this conversation, and you can give me your ideas and like whatever is missing from this workshop that you want to see covered, or like what would be in the intermediate or advanced or follow-up version, you know. I think that, you know, I would personally love to hear from you, so.
So,
yeah, go on.
I'm turning it over to Alison. I am really sorry, I need to jet because I have an argument on Monday, so I need to prepare for this one this morning. I'm leaving, but I'm leaving my cards here because, as you said at the beginning, I love librarians. So if you guys have follow-up questions and or if something else comes up, you should really feel free to give me a call. I mean it. You know, it's my day when I get calls from librarians. So I'm going to leave a bunch of them here.
So I know we went for another hour, and we are a little over time, but I'm totally cool if you guys want to get up and stretch again. Do you need to do that? No? Okay, are you sure? Like, don't feel like just because I said that we're running out of time. What I'm going to do, I think that we probably won't get through my whole presentation, but what I'll do is I'll go until about 4, and then like if people are super into it and want me to keep going like for another few minutes, then we'll do that, but certainly feel an obligation, I can stop at 4. So, once again, I'm Alison. Hi, everybody. And I'm going to talk to you now about the tech part of this whole privacy conversation. First things first, that is my email address, alison@libraryfreedomproject.org. If you go to that website, there's nothing on it yet. But I have an email address, and I have my TLS set up. I'm going to show you that later. And then the link right below that, watertownlib.org/privacy-tools. I've got links to all the tools I'm going to be talking about today, and then some further resources. So, you know, as some of the tools I'm going to just tell you about, some of them I'm going to kind of demonstrate how they work. But you don't need to worry about like capturing the URL that I'm looking at or whatever. Everything access them and download them on your own. And like I said, I've got some further resources on there too. So hang on to that link. Also, if you want these slides, please feel free to email me. I'll send them to you. Okay, so everything I'm going to show you today, I have either installed on the computers at Watertown Library, or I have taught them to patrons in one-on-one tech sessions or in computer classes. I teach a basic privacy class and an intermediate privacy class. I'm working on the advanced one, but as I'm sure a lot of you know, working with members of the public, with ordinary users, a lot of them have really basic tech skills, and so we're sort of, at least with the Watertown community, we're really not quite ready for the advanced stuff yet. But I have been teaching the basics and intermediate to my community for a while. All the tools I'm going to talk about, with a couple exceptions, are free, as in gratis. I do recommend donating money to these organizations because most of the time they are volunteer run, but you can get them for free. And then most of them are pretty easy to set up, don't really require any maintenance. I've got a few that are sort of on the intermediate and advanced scale, and I'm going to tell you kind of which ones those are, and you'll probably figure it out. But for the most part, anybody can use these. You really don't have to have like elite hacker skills to be able to make them work for you. And Kade talked a whole bunch about the government surveillance part. A lot of the tools that I'm focusing on are a little bit more about corporate surveillance, but we obviously know the relationships that they have. We know about the prison program. We know how they collude with each other. The tools I'm going to talk about are, most of them will cover both. They'll protect you from certain kinds of government and local police surveillance, certain kinds of corporate surveillance, and then like just your sort of mundane, like annoying person in mom's basement trying to hack your computer, which I happen to think is, computer privacy at the mundane level, I think is still an important social issue that is not addressed. So this will protect your patrons against some of that stuff too. And then the last one on this slide, I want you to think about privacy like an onion. This is a metaphor that is used pretty often in the InfoSec community. The logo of the Tor project is actually an onion, and the reason why an onion is used is because the more layers you have to your digital privacy, the more that you do, it's going to be better, and it gives you, encryption is often talked about in layers like that, but kind of like an onion, even if you have many layers to it, it's still kind of transparent. So it's important to think about this level of transparency because no matter what you're using, it might still be possible to discover some information about you. There's no such thing as perfect privacy. So don't overtrust your own OPSEC, okay? All right, so the things I'm going to talk about today. So a couple things starting. Whenever I teach this stuff to patrons, the thing I try to really drill home to them the whole time is about changing their expectations and behavior. Something about privacy compromising software is that it is often really convenient, or it's like the most popular one. Internet Explorer is the default on most library computers. That's just one example. So in using these tools and installing them and making it a practice, things are going to behave a little bit differently. You might have to give up some of your convenience for the sake of your privacy. So really, I don't think it really represents that much of an inconvenience, but it's still going to be a little bit different. And then within all these tools, I'm going to introduce you to some concepts in digital privacy that you might not be familiar with: encryption, free and open source software, proxies, things like that. And then all the tools fit into the following categories: safer browsing, temp file security, Wi-Fi security, anonymity, viruses and malware, passwords, some general tips, and then ways to go further if you are an A+ star student. And by the way, ask me questions as we go, okay? So first things first, safer browsing. So I think this is the best place to start because I think it could have the biggest impact on patron privacy if we started implementing this across the board in libraries. So your browser privacy really depends on who owns the browser and who maintains it. The most popular browsers, probably most of you in the room know who owns and maintains every single one of those. Chrome is owned by Google, Internet Explorer is owned by Microsoft, Safari owns Apple. These are proprietary companies. They do not make the source code available for people to view or to edit or change. This makes them closed source or proprietary. The reason why, and let me first explain what free and open source means. So free software is, just like this definition says, anyone can use it, they can copy it, they can make changes to it, they can fork it, which means you start with one source code and you can modify it slightly to make it a little bit different. Sometimes it's called versioning. Open source means that it's not just that it's free, that anyone can study or copy it, but it's openly shared. It's made available on a site like GitHub or something like that, where it's not just that you can improve on it, but that you're encouraged to improve on it. So the reason why this matters for privacy is because if anyone can view it or change it, it's got a level of transparency that those proprietary browsers do not have. So let's say I'm a government entity and I want to put a backdoor on one of these browsers. Well, if you're using a proprietary source code browser, the average developer can't go in and look and see that the government has put a backdoor in there or put something malicious in there. So the only way to have browser privacy is for it to be totally open, totally transparent, and able to be edited by anyone. So the only browser that is free and open source is Firefox. So I recommend using Firefox as the default on all your patron PCs, teaching people about it. People maybe are not used to seeing it, but on all the icons on Firefox, it doesn't say Firefox, it says Internet. And then people click it for the internet, right? Because they click Internet Explorer because it has the word internet in it. It's not like they love that one, they're just looking to get on the internet. So, the next few things I'm going to talk about are some browser add-ons that you can add to Firefox to increase the privacy of it. Now, if people are not familiar with what an add-on is, usually the example I give, who uses Netflix in here? Okay, the first time you started using Netflix, it made you install something called Microsoft Silverlight. Remember that? That's an add-on. All it is a component that adds a feature to your browser. It can be anything. There are add-ons that do all kinds of cool stuff. The only ones I'm going to talk about are for privacy and security. But I encourage you to browse the Mozilla add-on store because there's all kinds of cool shit in there. So the first one, we talked a little bit about behavioral advertising before, talking about how Gmail spies on all your content. This happens across the web. Your searches are completely collected by Google. They use an algorithm to pull out keywords and then sell that to advertisers to target ad content to you. So there's a great plugin that you can use called AdBlock Plus. It blocks, as the default, it blocks banner ads, pop-up ads, and video ads. And then you can go in and change the settings slightly to block what they call non-intrusive ads and give yourself a greater level of blocking of those advertisers. So it's not simply that you're blocking yourself from seeing them, but you're blocking them from seeing you. So the content is still being collected by Google. We're going to get to that in a little while. But the advertisers aren't going to have access to it, and they're not going to be able to get that information about you. The other thing about AdBlock Plus is that it will help you with some ad-based malware. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of those ads, those clickable ads, are actually malware. You click on them, and they have sometimes JavaScript, which can initiate an application directly through your browser. And you don't even know it, your computer's been owned because you clicked on something that said that it was an ad, but it was actually malware. So when you don't see the ads, you're not going to click on malware. And I think this is great for patrons because, once again, if they have low tech literacy skills, they have no idea there's malware behind that ad. They might not even know they clicked on an ad. So I think that this is a good kind of, passive protection for them. Similarly, to behavioral advertising, this category that I'm just calling third-party web tracking. So I'm sure that a lot of you are at least somewhat familiar with what a cookie is, but a basic definition of a cookie is a text file that stores a message. And you get cookies from doing all kinds of things. Every time you visit a website and click a link, if you click a video, basically any of your behavior on that site, a cookie is created based on what you just did. So it's like a little message about whatever you just did on their website. Similarly, there are things called widgets. You've seen like the little Facebook share button. That's a widget. That is also collecting information about you. Web analytics collects information about you, sometimes through the use of cookies. Web beacons, also kind of similar. Basically, all you need to know about the distinction between these things is that they are third parties who are collecting information about your web behavior from the website that you have visited, and they usually have nothing to do with your originating website. So, there is an add-on that will blind them. It's called Privacy Badger. It's from the lovely people at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I'm actually going to show you how this one works directly because I think it's pretty cool. So, super easy to use. It stops these third-party trackers from secretly following you all over the web. And I just want to make one distinction about these cookies. So sometimes a website has its own cookies that are vital for the site to function. So if you go into Firefox and you say block all cookies, the web's probably not going to work very well for you. This is just blocking those third-party cookies and third-party trackers that do not originate with the site and don't have anything to do with how the site functions. So you're not going to make it so that the website doesn't work for you. I think that's really important. So this is different from AdBlock Plus in that some of the tracking that I'm talking about on here is not advertising tracking. Some of it's analytics tracking. It just wants to know kind of who you are, where you came from, and where you're going to after you leave this site. So they work really well in conjunction with each other. They sort of identify different problems. So I'm going to show you real quick what this looks like. So there's the Privacy Badger website. You can see, lovely. When you install your add-ons, by the way, they're going to show up over here on the right in your add-on toolbar. Right here is AdBlock Plus. Like I said before, I recommend looking in the filter preferences and making sure that you've got, or I'll even show you, uncheck the non-intrusive advertising button. And you can add some filter descriptions. You can add like other ad blocking lists that they've created other than their default ones, so like you can get a greater level of security for yourself. So Privacy Badger, confusingly, looks a lot like AdBlock Plus when you install it. It's a little red stop sign kind of thing. So when you're on EFF's website, it says, oh, it can't detect any tracking because EFF doesn't track you. But let's go to the popular infotainment site, salon.com, and see what we have on there. Let's give it a moment. So it's taking a while to load. You might notice that sometimes your news websites take a while to load. It's because they're loading all this other content from these third parties. It's slowing down your web experience. So, oh God, these functions. Don't even look at them. Oh, horrible, gross white men. Okay, racists. So take your eyes away from these racists for just a second, and let's click on Privacy Badger and see what's happened. Wow, look at all that content that Privacy Badger has just blocked. They're blocking Facebook, they're blocking New Relic, which is an advertising company, DoubleClick, which is advertising and also analytics, a couple others. So, you know, this is just one site. New York Times, Guardian, every news site, lots of other sites that like want to know information about their users, they've got all this stuff on here. So Privacy Badger will take that down, pretty awesome. I think the default for a lot of them is that they do enable them. They'll have a little green thing on the slidey bar. The yellow one in the middle, you can just block cookies. The red one, you can block everything. Pretty awesome. So moving along from third-party web tracking. Okay, so encrypted browsing. So I'm sure that a lot of you already know what HTTPS is. You've gone to your banking website, or you bought an airline ticket, or you've had some kind of secure transaction where you had to enter credit card information or your SSN or something like that, and you'll see a couple things happen. The HTTP at the beginning of your web address turns into HTTPS, and a little lock will show up. And if you click the lock, you can view some more information about the security of the website. Basically, what this means is it stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, and it's a protocol for the web. It's called, basically, it's HTTP combined with something called TLS, which is Transport Layer Security. Sometimes it's referred to as SSL. SSL is an old version of TLS, but they basically mean the same thing. I mean, it doesn't really matter which one you say. It adds a layer of security on top of websites. It does this through 3 different measures. So the first one is encryption. And when I refer to encryption, I mean the process of scrambling a message into a secret code so that it can only be read by the intended recipients. So if I want to send, if I'm sending an encrypted message, only me and the person that person or server or computer on the other end that I'm trying to reach can read that. It's a lock and key kind of thing. You exchange a key, and only the people who have access to the keys can read the message. Anybody else just sees a bunch of garbled numbers and letters. So how this works on HTTPS Oh, so that's encryption. There are two other things about HTTPS, data integrity and data authentication. So TLS, when you have your site secured with TLS, you have something called a security certificate that is signed by an authorizing body that basically says, this is absolutely the site that it purports to be, and we guarantee its authenticity and we're signing off on it. And so you have authentication. You know that when your computer makes a request over an HTTPS connection, the server on the other side is the server that you intend to reach. When they're sending that back to you, you get that message. Your computer does something called a handshake that says, okay, we know for sure that this is the server that we want. And I'll explain why that's important in a second. The third thing is data integrity. So because you have your data is encrypted in transit, and because it's authenticated with the server on the other end, you can guarantee that the integrity of your data has not been compromised. This is important because if you have an unsecure connection, someone could inject something in that data coming back to you that's malicious, and you would never know it. They can inject malware. It's called network injection. And actually, there's a really great article. I keep forgetting to link to it on the list of privacy tools, but in The Intercept, they reported on this. If you look up like how your computer can get hacked by watching this cat video, I'm sure you're going to find it. Basically, it gives a really simple explanation of how HTTP network injection works, where if you are viewing stuff over an insecure connection, it doesn't matter if the information you're sending out is not actually sensitive. You're protecting yourself from exploits coming back in. You're protecting your privacy because you know for certain, if you're using HTTPS, that none of that has been tampered with. So, a couple things that libraries should be doing around HTTPS. The first thing, the easiest thing, is installing the HTTPS Everywhere plugin on Firefox on all your computers. HTTPS Everywhere is another plugin from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and the way it works is basically it goes around the web and it finds websites that are compatible with HTTPS but haven't fully set it up properly. And unfortunately, the thing about setting up TLS is that it is difficult. It's a server-side configuration. I just set it up on my website, and I had someone from Tor Project helping me, and like shit was hard. And so it's not simple, and there are a lot of steps to it. And it's very easy to leave one of the steps out. So sometimes this will happen, and HTTPS Everywhere goes in and patches it. If they see that most of the elements are there, they fix it to make it work by default. That's the other thing. Sometimes it's set up properly, but it's not the default, and it'll make it the default always. I think that in addition to installing this add-on, libraries should be making their catalogs and their websites default to HTTPS. Now, I did just say that it's very difficult. I've got some instructions in the list of privacy links, but I think that this is worth paying someone to do for you. One of the links that I gave is for something called SSL Labs, and they have some information and resources for making this work on your own or having somebody help you with it. But it's certainly worth it. And then also you can be the envy of all your friends and be like me and have an A+ SSL website. I just want to show this off because it was so freaking hard to do. If you ever want to see if a website's security, this is a kind of a neat tool to have because not all HTTPS is going to be great. Some of it is, like I said, a lot of the elements end up missing. If your site is already on HTTPS, great, awesome, that's wonderful. Put it on SSL Labs and see what kind of grade it gets, and see if you could maybe improve on the security of it a little bit. All right. So, search tracking. So, we talked about this a little bit already with behavioral advertising. Google, Bing, Yahoo, all these major search engines, everything that you type into the search engine, they're collecting. I mean, these are surveillance companies, they're advertising companies. This is how they make their money. And insidiously, they have this thing. I don't know if people are familiar with the third-party doctrine. Have you guys heard of that before? So basically the third-party doctrine says that if you share personally identifiable information with a third party, like a corporate body that you have volunteered your information to, like a Google, that you have no expectation of privacy because you volunteered it. I think that that is deeply unethical. So it's one reason why I'm trying to sort of get myself off Google, but I get that it's really hard. There are a couple steps that you can take though. Gmail is one of the hardest things to get off because there isn't a very good free email service that you can replace it with. But there's a great search engine that you can replace Google with, and it's called DuckDuckGo. I'm going to demonstrate it to you because there's a really cute thing that it does around a particular library thing. I'll show you it in a second. One of the great things about DuckDuckGo is that it has an add-on for Firefox, and I'm going to show you that add-on too. It makes a little DuckDuckGo default search bar right in your browser. This is one thing that I found that patrons have some difficulty getting used to, just because they're so used to seeing Google, and if it doesn't look like Google, I mean, we know that they get to websites by Googling them. So if the first site that they see, I mean, those of us in the room who have worked in libraries before, I'm sure this has happened to you where a patron's like, I can't get to the website I want, and you realize they're searching your website or your catalog instead of searching the web. So, we really have to consider this kind of stuff, that change is not only something kind of scary, but like it can be a huge issue for access, and we certainly don't want to prevent anybody from accessing what they need. So I recommend making a little sign that says, hey, just so you know, your search engine might look different, here's why. And then I'm going to show you the Google sharing plugin, but let me show you real quick what, one thing I didn't mention when I was talking about HTTPS, EFF has a new campaign called Let's Encrypt, and I linked to this on the privacy tools, which is why I didn't really go into it, but if you find that TLS is way too hard for you, EFF has this thing that they're setting up in the summer where they will be making it so that anyone can secure their website for free in an automated form, super easy TLS, HTTPS. So like if you can't get this taken care of, don't even worry about it because in the summer they got you covered. So keep that link. It's in the privacy links. So this is what DuckDuckGo looks like. It's got this cute little duck, whatever, and it kind of looks like Google. I mean, it's got a sort of simple, lightweight interface in the way that Google does. And this is great right here, the search engine that doesn't track you. That's all you need to know. I was talking about the add-on. You can get that from the Mozilla add-on store. It's in the list of privacy links. But once you've got it installed, you get this little add-on toolbar right here that defaults to DuckDuckGo. And as soon as you start typing something in it, I'm going to do this so that I can show you the cool library thing. You can switch to another search engine if you want to. It doesn't force you to use DuckDuckGo, it just makes it the default. So this is a cool thing. Oops, no, I don't want a definition. Get out of here. So DuckDuckGo lists Dewey call numbers. If you look up something with the word Dewey in front, I think that's pretty cute. So just a little, library love that they give.
Do you find that it's like as effective at like?
It's a really sophisticated search engine. Like it is not the bootleg Google at all. I mean, it's definitely different. Their algorithm is a little different. If you're used to seeing things in a certain order, that's going to change. You also might have noticed that they don't have ads on there at all. And this is a super important thing for privacy that, again, I think it's overlooked. I recently, I have screenshots of this, but I took them out of my presentation because Google fixed this. But if you searched in Google, and all these search engines fixed it, you searched in Google, Bing, or Yahoo for Firefox, all the sponsored links were malware. And they were nasty malware too. I put them through Anubis, which is this malware detection software, and it was like making registry changes and like all this stuff that basically gets installed that you will never know or see or be able to change. And most malware functions as spyware. It's sending information about your computer and your internet behavior back to some central server. Who is running that malware? Who knows? We know that the government uses malware all the time. They buy it from companies like FinFisher and Hacking Team. These are companies that make jillions of dollars selling malicious software to sovereign nations, and they're allowed to do this. It's pretty incredible. But so all the first links on all those for Firefox were malware. Now think about patrons, how infrequently they know that the first links are ads. They click on one that says, hey, download the Firefox browser right here. They're going to click on it, and they're going to end up with something really malicious on their computer. So DuckDuckGo doesn't do anything like that, which is awesome. So one other thing about searching, so you might have come across websites sometimes that have an embedded Google search bar. It'll say like, search sponsored by Google on this site. And sometimes library websites have this. There is a way to blind it. It's another add-on for Firefox. It's called Google Sharing. This one is, I showed you how some of the add-ons that you install are going to show up in that little add-on toolbar on the right. Google Sharing is weird. It just like goes away. It's like an invisible one. But basically, you install it. You can look at it in your add-on list. I actually, on the list of privacy links, I gave instructions for getting to your add-ons from Firefox, like if you ever want to disable or remove them. So you can look in there and make sure that Google Sharing is installed, and it's fine. But basically, you can then use those search bars, and none of that information is going to be sent back to Google. Pretty cool little plugin. So this is one of my favorite ones. Okay, terms of service and privacy. Raise your hand if the first question applies to you. You read the terms of service before clicking yes. You're full of shit. Show off. So most people don't do.
I thought that was the opposite. No, of course not.
Okay, good. Then you're not a liar. You're just confused.
I was like,
Somebody
wait.
has an hour to read.
I was like, why
No,
not?
exactly. They're like 18
lying.
pages long. I mean, it's not just that they're so long, but that they're impossible to understand, and it actually doesn't even matter because most of them can change their terms at any time without notifying the end user. Most people don't know that. So this is an amazing add-on. Terms of service didn't read. The website of terms of service didn't read. If you go to it, I think it says like, I have read and agreed to the terms of service is the biggest lie on the internet, and we aim to fix that. So what they do is users send them privacy policies and website terms, which often have a huge amount to do with the user privacy. And they evaluate them and they give them a letter grade from A to E. And it tells you in plain English what you are agreeing to and what you're giving up when you use this service. So let me just show you real quick what this looks like on a site with a TOS. So this is the terms of service didn't read site. When you install it, you get this little cute rainbow right here. And when you're on a site that doesn't have a TOS or hasn't been rated yet, it gives you this message. And you can send TOSDR the privacy policy for the site, and they'll evaluate it, which is awesome. But let's see what happens when we go to one of the worst services for privacy. Suddenly that rainbow turns into a letter grade. TwitPic. It gets an E. Actually, I guess TwitPic doesn't really exist anymore, but when it did, it was bad. So when you click on the letter, it tells you exactly why it got this grade. So in brief, the terms of service raise very serious concerns. Couple things. You indemnify them completely from any claim made by any third party related to your content. So they can't get in any legal trouble because of your content. If you delete something, they still have it forever. They take credit for your content, so they can use it and make money from it. Another thing that comes up pretty often, and this is in YouTube's privacy policy in terms of service, that they can change their terms of service at any time and they don't have to notify you. So theirs is already pretty bad. Google and YouTube gets a D. And they can change it and you would have no idea. So this, I think, is a really great passive tool for patron education. I think, people will see this change into a letter and they're like, what is that? And they click on it and they get this information about the site that they wouldn't have had otherwise. They can read the terms down here. And even though this doesn't fix the problem, I think it really is important for people to know how little these companies care about your privacy. So that is TOSDR, pretty awesome. Okay, whoops. Did I go to this one first? Okay, I think I wanted to talk about Wi-Fi first. Okay, good, that's still there. All right, so temp files and privacy. So I talked about blocking certain kinds of third-party cookies and beacons and things like that. And that will take care of blocking a lot of the content that would then be stored on your computer, because that's how a cookie works. It's stored, it's not just information that's sent back to the server of whatever site you're visiting, but a temporary file is created and put on your computer that has that information in it. And this is true about the cookies that are not third parties, that like whatever website you're visiting needs these cookies to function. It's storing them temporarily on your PC. Likewise, your browser cache, which is all the images and data that have loaded on a website. Your cache stores them to make the website load a little faster next time, but if you delete your cache, it doesn't really change the speed of your site. I mean, it's 2014, most people have high-speed internet, or the library at least has high-speed internet. Likewise, your browser history, a list of all your visited sites, cookies and session data, and I guess I put a comma there for no reason. Your session data has other kinds of identifiable information about you and your web behavior. Basically, what you need to know about all these is that they are like internet breadcrumbs. They are a trail of where you've been, and they can predict where you're going. They have all this information about what you've done, and they can not only tell someone a huge amount of information about you, they can themselves serve as surveillance beacons that then transmit information back from your local computer to a server that is spying on you. So, there is a really amazing tool called CCleaner that you can use to delete all this stuff in one fell swoop and make it securely gone from your computer completely. Now, one thing I want to say about the tools I mentioned below that, a lot of folks who have already worked in libraries know about Deep Freeze or Clean Slate. If you don't, basically what they are is they are software programs that make it so that when one patron logs off the computer, it'll reboot, and then the next patron won't see any of the information from her session. So it removes all this kind of temporary information for the next user. However, neither Deep Freeze nor Clean Slate is secure deletion, which means that that information can be retrieved. So even though it's great for like patron-to-patron privacy, if the police wanted to seize a computer, or if somebody wanted to hack into it, through forensic analysis, they could get that information back. CCleaner will delete it forever. So I'm going to show you real quick how CCleaner works. So this is the CCleaner website. As you can see, there's a free version and there's a paid version. I really don't know what's better about the paid version. I think it's a little bit easier in like an enterprise environment. So if you end up working in a library and you're the IT manager like I am, so the way that CCleaner works, once you've got the application downloaded, as you can see, it shows my native Mac applications in one tab, and then anything that I've downloaded from third parties in the other tab. And by default, it will remove my cache, my history, my cookies, my download history, my session data, my site preferences. And if I wanted to, I can get rid of saved form information and saved passwords, although it'll warn you about that. And likewise, it'll get rid of my trash, like some other temporary system files. Couple of options important in CCleaner. So if you go down here to the options menu, the default is normal file deletion. I really recommend that everyone use secure file deletion because it will be possible to get that information back if you don't. And then depending on your level of paranoia, you can do a simple overwrite, a medium, or a complex. Basically, that just means that it's going to go and check again, and check again, and check again, and check again, and make sure it hasn't missed anything. So I can't show you a whole CCleaner session because I'd have to close Firefox, and then it would also take a while anyway. But basically, I'll just hit Run Cleaner so you can get a little sense of it. So it'll start moving this along, and even if you don't do this that much, it won't really slow down the other applications that you have. Works really nicely in the background. It will make you close your browser. You do have to close your tabs. You're going to lose them, so save them somewhere. And then once it's finished, it'll show you everything that it cleaned. So this is a great example because I never use Safari for anything, ever. I barely even open it, and I clean my computer with CCleaner about once a month. I maybe have opened Safari like once or twice in that month, and look at all the files that Safari still had. Just from me opening it, I didn't even go anywhere. So, and that's not even everything that it cleaned. So you can, if you're the kind of person who likes to look at the Q-tips after you clean your ears, it's really fun to like look and see just how much information is being removed. So, pretty neat tool.
That's so gross.
It's gross, yes. I know, so sorry, yes.
I saw the recent documents, so will that delete, like, if you create, like, Word documents or something from your computer?
It's just deleting, like, the history of it. It's not deleting any saved files. But you know how, like, when you go to recent documents, it'll show you the ones that you opened up last?
Mm-hmm.
It just removes the history of that, which I think is a really useful thing. If I wanted to if I wanted to own someone's computer, if I wanted to spy on them, I would certainly want to see what they've been working on. I mean, they could still go into your documents and look at the timestamp and that sort of thing, but like, still, it's more information about you that someone can't get to. Okay, so Wi-Fi security. So this one is a little bit in the privacy world. People fit into one of two camps, and there's only two camps that you can fit into. So you might hear some contradicting information about this. Let me give you both sides. Basically, there's one camp that says that open Wi-Fi is the best for net security because if you make it open, there's no password, anyone can access it, then you have not only a greater measure of access because everyone can just log on to any strong network and they can just pass through different networks and everybody has access and whatever, and you have a measure of plausible deniability. So if somebody is on your open Wi-Fi network and they're doing something that the FBI thinks is suspicious and they come to you because you're the one who has the modem in your house, you can say, look, my network is open, I have no idea who that is, it wasn't me, plausible deniability, right? And this is useful for libraries. The Electronic Frontier Foundation is a proponent of open Wi-Fi, and they have something called the EFF Open Wireless Movement, and I've linked to it in the list of privacy links. I encourage you to read their full position, because I disagree with them. I am more interested in the second option, which is closed Wi-Fi, because when you password protect your Wi-Fi, you get encrypted Wi-Fi. So the data that is sent over your network in transit is encrypted. It works really similarly to HTTPS. So once again, you have encryption, you have authentication, and you have data integrity. Obviously, this does pose a problem for access in libraries because if you've got a password-protected network, lots of people who never will come in your building but use your Wi-Fi from the parking lot or in the middle of the night or whatever. If we password protected, those people are never going to have access, and we certainly don't want to exclude them. So I offer two networks. So you can see on this, I'm actually in this screenshot, I'm logged into the Watertown staff network, but I've got WFPL free Wi-Fi and then WFPL secure ask for password. And the password is an open secret. Anybody can have it. It's given out at the reference desk. It doesn't matter if the password itself is something that everybody knows. It could be Watertown123. Even if you have a password for the network, you don't have access to the encrypted data, right? But the password kicks the encryption into gear. So I find that patrons, we explain to them why we have two networks, and they always want to get on the secure network. So I think offering two networks, and the other thing is that if you have a wired network, the data in a wired network is encrypted, and it is possible to snoop on that data, but you have to have a physical connection to the network. So somebody, so if you have LAN ports in your library that you let tutors use or someone taking a test or something like that, really strongly encourage you to make them dark when they're not in use, because someone could plug into them and then have access to some of the information on your network, and that's not that safe. Okay, wow. This is my favorite part of the talk, and we don't have much time, so I'm going to try to bust through Tor and stuff, and then we'll see how people are feeling. Okay, so anonymous browsing. So there is only one browser that you can use for anonymity, and it's called Tor. Who here has heard of Tor? Awesome, okay. So Tor is an amazing tool. It is a really easy to use tool, and it does a whole lot for the user. I think it's important to make a distinction between what I mean when I refer to privacy and when I refer to anonymity. So privacy, I think, is, you should have the expectation that the information that you are sending over the web can only be read by the intended recipients, kind of what encryption protects you against. Anonymity, on the other hand, means that people cannot find out either who you are or where you are or both. So what the Tor browser bundle does is it anonymizes your location by giving you an IP address that is not related to where you are. And the other thing that it does is every time you use Tor, your browsing history, your session data, all that local temp file stuff, they don't save any of that. So it's ephemeral too. So the Tor browser bundle, when you install it, and I'm going to show you a little bit how it works in a second, It includes a couple of plugins, HTTPS Everywhere, which we already talked about, and something called NoScript. What NoScript does is it blocks any JavaScript that is on a web page. And the reason why this is important for privacy is because JavaScript can initiate an executable file in your browser. We talked about network injection or how malware can be injected over an insecure connection. It's quite often JavaScript is involved in this equation somewhere. So NoScript makes it so that JavaScript completely will fail in the Tor browser. And I recommend leaving it on the default block all JavaScript because unless you really know what you're doing, you could end up giving it access to something that would not just potentially allow malware onto your computer, but it will de-anonymize you. But the thing to know about NoScript is that a lot of sites need JavaScript to work properly, so things in the Tor browser sometimes look totally bananas. You can also use NoScript in other browsers. You can use it in Firefox. I didn't talk about it today, but I encourage you to take a look at the link that I provided in our list of privacy links and see what else it can do. So a couple things about Tor. So it can be pretty difficult for an ordinary user. It's pretty slow. And like I said, it doesn't really work that well with certain sites. Like if you log on to you shouldn't use it with personally identifying accounts unless you made the account in Tor, because someone who wants to spy on you could easily cross-reference and figure out what your location is. But if you log on to a Google account that you created in Tor, Google makes you fill out 30 CAPTCHAs, and then they send this security check to your email, and then you have to verify it, and they really do not like Tor. So these are some things to know about using it. There are some really great instructions and best practices on the Tor website for getting started with Tor and some of the things to know if you've never used it before. But I really recommend it as something that you have just as another browser option on your patron PCs. You can give them some information about it. Even if they don't want to use it for true anonymity, I think that we really should be the places where people are learning about something like Tor, because where people are learning about Tor right now is in the media, and in the media, the dominant narrative, I think, has been that it's for terrorists, which is what the NSA says. One of their slides, have you guys seen the Tor terrorist slide from the NSA? It's a really funny one. It's like this guy with a mask and a Kalashnikov on his back, and it's this is what a terrorist with a Tor client installed looks like. So there are plenty of people who, I know, it's so ridiculous, plenty of people who need and deserve online anonymity that are not doing anything wrong. And if you need to convince your library stakeholders, directors, boards of trustees, whomever, about using Tor, one of the best explanations of a Tor user group that is not a criminal user group is domestic violence survivors. Actually, the Tor project, a lot of them are based in Cambridge. They're so cool. They go to DV shelters and install Tor on the computers there. And they use the next tool that I'm going to talk about too. So that's a really easy, obvious user group that wants anonymity, that deserves anonymity. We should be helping them preserve their anonymity from their abusers. And they have something to hide, but they're not criminal. Yes, Kate?
I know you didn't bring it up, and I'm so sorry to interrupt you when I know you're limited on time, but what is something ridiculous to just 85 or 90% of some extremely high, more than 75% of cases of DV that DV workers have been seeing recently involve some form of technological surveillance.
Yep.
So this is huge.
Huge.
This is
Yeah.
the new thing in intimate partner violence is, technological surveillance.
Yep. Yeah. No. Thanks for bringing that up. So just real quick, I'll show you what Tor looks like. So you can see it's a little slower than another web browser, but it works fine. Comes installed with a search engine called Start Page, and you can switch to a different search engine if you want. I use DuckDuckGo on it because I think it's better than Start Page, but Start Page is an anonymous search engine too. And it tells me right here that my IP address is linked to an anonymous proxy. Sometimes it'll be some other place that you're not in. Recently, my Tor browser was in Paris, and that was lovely. And so, that's basically, what it is and how it works. There are a couple other things, though, about Tor, ways that libraries can participate in the Tor project and help the Tor project. And one of them is running Tor relays. So the way that the Tor network works is it bounces your traffic over a set of relays, anonymizing you every time. It's 3 layers of encryption. So your traffic, it starts with you, then it goes to a middle relay, sometimes another middle relay, and then it comes out of an exit relay ultimately, and the only identifiable spot is that exit relay. Where you came from is not discoverable at all. So these relays are run by a network of volunteers all over the world, and consider that there are about 4 million Tor users worldwide, only about 5,000 or 6,000 relays. So that's partly why the Tor network is so slow, is because we need more of these relays to help the thing run. There just aren't enough of them. So it takes a long time for that traffic to get bounced. So there are a couple different kinds of relays. Middle relays are the middle point in the route. The exit relays are the ones that they exit from, pretty obvious. But then there's these other things called bridges, and basically what you need to know about those is only that bridges are relays that are specifically set up for users from countries where the internet is particularly censored, like Iran or China. So I really recommend that libraries run middle relays because they're not identifiable. So even though there's no one who runs an exit relay has ever gotten into any serious trouble, although they have the guy from Calix Institute, I forget what the case was with him, but he was running like 10 exit relays and some kind of traffic came through one of them that was suspicious or something like that. Basically, he did have to fight it, but the EFF and other rights organizations are really committed to helping folks who want to run these relays. But if you don't want to get into the legal stuff at all, and I certainly understand as an institution like a library, why would you want to bring that headache on yourself? The middle relay will not get you in any legal trouble at all. And I actually have a letter that I wrote to my town attorney. If anybody wants that letter, I can give it to you. Just email me. Making the case for Tor and kind of explaining why it is legally sound and it's not something the library can get in any trouble for. So pretty difficult to set up one of these things. I have instructions on the list of privacy links from the Tor project. But once you have it set up, it just runs. You don't have to do anything for it. Briefly, what you need is a computer with a clock rate fast enough to run a server. So lots of libraries just got rid of all their old Windows XP computers. A lot of them are fast enough to install like an Ubuntu server or something like that. The computer is just dedicated to running this. And then you have to allot it a little bit of bandwidth, not that much. Certainly not so much that it would have any effect on the speed of your network. And that's it. And then you can look at, there's a Tor project atlas that you can look at your relay and see how much traffic is going through it. It's pretty cool. So if anybody is really committed and they want to try to do this at the library where they work or their local library, I would love to help you because I think this is one of the most important things that we could be doing. Okay, wait, it's 4 o'clock. How do you guys feel? You want me to keep going for like 10 minutes? Is that cool? Okay, feel free to leave if you gotta go. Don't make me keep you. Okay, so Tails is another really incredible project from the Tor people. Stands for the Amnesiac Incognito Live System, and it's a whole operating system. It is based on Linux Debian. If anybody's ever used a GNU Linux distribution, they will be familiar with the interface of it a little bit. And it basically gives you everything that you could possibly want for using the internet anonymously and leaving no trace. Now the Tor project, they not only install Tor on computers in DV shelters, but they set them up with Tails too. They're really cool people. I try to give them money when I have money. So Tails, it uses the Tor network to encrypt and anonymize all internet traffic. It also has an instant message client, an email client. It's got an Office suite. It's got everything. I mean, it's a whole operating system complete. And basically what it does, you make a Tails drive, either with a CDR or with a USB stick, and I've got a link to the Tails website where you can get instructions on this. And you will set your computer up so that it can boot from an external device. It's in the the BIOS, super easy to get to. And what you do is you plug in, let's say you got a USB stick, you reboot your computer, and your computer boots back up into Tails. It won't make any permanent changes to your system, so if you make these drives and you let patrons use them in the library, you don't have to worry about them screwing up anything in any permanent way. It really is just a virtual machine that they can use. And once they've removed the drive or removed the CD, everything that they did, completely gone, no trace. So it's a pretty amazing tool. It can be a little bit hard to get used to just because it's a totally new operating system. I can't show you a demo of it, obviously, because I'd have to reboot my computer. But here's just a little screenshot of the Tails applications menu open, and you can see in the applications menu, it's got all kinds of stuff. You know, there's office programs, you've got your internet, accessories. It gives you something called clause mail that you can set up, and you can use like a temporary ephemeral email account with this too, which is pretty awesome. If you don't want your regular email to be attached to an anonymous network, if you feel like that's unsafe. So it's a really amazing tool. One thing is that this will override your like patron authentication system, obviously, because no one can log into the computer if they're using Tails. But what I think is a good idea is check it out at the circulation desk and check it out for the amount of time that you want the person to be using the computer. So if it's like, if you give people 60-minute sessions, just make this thing check out for 60 minutes, and then they're not going to be able to hop the computer all day. So. All right, so the rest of the stuff I've got is like pretty simple stuff, but you might just not be aware of, you know, some of the best practices. So, viruses and malware have a relationship to user privacy. They can allow spying implements onto your computer. Usually that is kind of their function. It's not just that these, the people who create these things want to just mess your computer up. They want to get information about you. So I recommend to patrons two programs. One of them is an antivirus and one of them an anti-malware. Antivirus programs you should only have one on your computer. It's kind of like condoms. If you use more than one, they're both going to fail. So don't do that. Use a good antivirus prophylactic. I like Avast because it's free, it's cross-platform, and it's got a Firefox plugin bundled in it, so it'll actually install an add-on that works for preventing viruses at the browser level. And, you know, it's a pretty robust tool. There's a premium version that's a little bit better, but, you know, I use the free one and I think it's totally fine. And then Malwarebytes is just for malware, so executable files. So viruses are things that attach themselves onto an application, and malware is an application unto itself. And most antivirus programs do nothing to prevent malware. I installed Malwarebytes on a friend's PC recently, and like, he had a great, you know, good antivirus program for a long time. We found so much shit on his computer in the registry, like really bad stuff. All the malware that I found from clicking the malicious ad links in Google search results, Malwarebytes caught them too. So pretty good. It's Windows only, but you know, OS X, Apple. First of all, there's not really much malware out there for OS X, and they have malware checks built into the operating system. So if you're using an Apple machine, you probably don't have to worry about malware. In the privacy links, I've included more info about those built-in malware checks, so you can look at that if you're so inclined. I would show you how Malwarebytes works because it's cool, but I have an Apple computer, so I can't. But I have Malwarebytes on all my public PCs, and it's a great tool. Okay, so passwords. So this seems like a painfully obvious thing, but even if you have great and strong passwords, you know, your patrons definitely don't, or at least the ones who come to my computer classes don't. There are two major problems with passwords, not just password weakness, but password entropy, which means using the same password over and over and over again for everything. I recommend going to that link, howsecureismypassword.net. Let me show you it real quick, actually. Pretty cool to see just like how easy it would be to guess a password. Like, I'm gonna put the word password in here so you can see.
Secure to enter your password?
It's not, no, very good question. Don't enter a real password in this. Don't enter a real password in anything other than the thing that is asking for your real password. Yes, I'm so glad you asked that. And actually they say on here, yes, this site could be stealing your password. It's not, but it easily could be. Be careful where you type your password. This is just giving you a sense of how much security you add when you add complexity. I'll show you what it looks like when I use a password that I used to use, that I no longer use, that is a combination of four English words with all the vowels taken out and replaced by symbols and numbers. And it's really easy for me to remember because it started with those original 4 English words, but I took out all the information that would have made it easy for a password cracker to replicate them, and like it's super secure. Good best practices should be more than 8 characters, mix of letters and numbers, and relate to no personally identifiable information. So who knows who Jeremy Hammond is? Computer hacker who was arrested. Basically, this is a dude who is now in prison and was caught in part because of some OPSEC fails, and one of them, this is a guy who knows a ton about computers. His password for everything was Chewy123. Chewy's his cat. It's like, password 101 stuff, super easy. So no personally identifiable information. We've already seen how easy it is to get out the content of something like your Gmail account, the name of your cat, your dad's middle name, your mom's birthday, whatever. All that stuff is in your Gmail, easy to find. The Bruce Schneier method is this one. So it relates to the sentence below it. This password once was secure, but now is not. He takes the first letter of every word in the sentence and makes some of them uppercase, some of them lowercase, and some of them numbers. And there you have a very secure password that you can easily remember. If you really have a great deal of difficulty remembering all these passwords, you can use a password manager. There are some pros and cons to these, obviously. Some of the ones that are in the cloud, like that are, there are browser plugins that you can get that will manage your passwords. You really shouldn't overtrust an application like that, because even if the information is encrypted and you think that the company is not going to collude with the government in some way, it can be hacked, right? So if it's in the cloud, if it's stored in your browser somewhere, it's not really that secure. But there is an application password manager that is encrypted and free and open source. It's called KeePassX, and I use it. I'll show you real quick how it works. I've got a link to downloading it on the privacy links. And once you get it downloaded, you create a master password, and then you create database files filled with your username and password, and every time you need to use one of those, you just open this application, enter your master password. It's the only one you have to remember, and then you can get at your password file. So I'm going to show you what it looks like when you create a new one. Because this is this application I think is pretty easy, pretty lightweight, but it's not got a great flashy UI, and it doesn't really specify exactly how you're supposed to store this stuff, so I think it's important to go through the steps basically. So when you open it, go to database, click new database. I'm going to come up with a fake password. This is a fake password. You click the little I and you can view it or leave it encrypted. And then you create a key file. You can either open one up if you have one already and it's on the same password, or you can create one, save it as my fake keys, and then you can click OK and it'll open it up. And then you just go to this little key button, and this is for fake, Macrina, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you can give the URL of whatever it is, or you can say like banking or something. And then you save it, and then it's right there, and you can access it really easily. So, this I think is a much more secure application because it's not sending that information over the web in any way. You have to first have access to my computer and then have access to my master password to be able to get at this. But once again, it's still an application. It's still storing your password information on your computer. So again, don't overtrust it. Know that it has the possibility to be broken and fail.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is that just a place to save all of your passwords?
Yep.
Or are applications actually going in and getting them?
Nope, you have to go in, good question, you have to go and copy and paste the information then back into your browser. But it's really not safe to leave your passwords and username and stuff stored in your browser. Even if you think that the site that you've got it stored on is sending it over HTTPS or something like that, it's really easy for for that stuff to get intercepted, especially if you use the same password for everything. You might have it stored on one site that's not so secure. You're using the same password for a site that is secure. Someone could just steal your password for one and then enter it for the other. So yeah, this is it's just storing them for you. It's storing them encrypted, and then you have to go in and copy them into your browser. So this is one of the things where you have to sacrifice a little bit of your convenience. But like, it's really not that inconvenient to open this thing up, copy the password, and then enter it in as I need it. And I think what it provides in terms of security is really big. I mean, there was a huge password breach. Like 1 billion passwords were stolen just a month ago. I mean, this is something that happens all the time, you know? So, okay, so to finish up, just some general tips. So Jesse talked about this a little bit before. Don't store your patron data if you can help it. If you have to store personally identifiable information about them, make it, set up a really strong data retention policy that says, you know, we will only store this for 3 days. We will only store this for 1 month. You know, the shorter amount of time, the better, you know, because you know, anyone who wants to access that information, the longer you keep it, obviously, the more access they're going to have. I wrote down some places that you can check for logs of personally identifiable information, like IP addresses, MAC addresses, usernames, library card numbers. The next thing, this is also a pretty obvious one, keep your software up to date. A lot of vulnerabilities in software are the ways that hackers get in, and they can very easily find out what version of a piece of software you're on, what version of an operating system you're on, and when they know that you're on an out-of-date one that has a security flaw, they're going to target you. It's going to be much easier for them to target you and then get at all this other information. So I use a tool called Ninite in my public PC environment at Watertown for updating things like Firefox. And it only works with Windows, but it's a really great tool. Basically, I'll show you the website real quick. You go in and you select from a list of applications here. And once you are ready, you click Get Installer, and it makes a little executable file that you can save, and then you just run it with some frequency, and it'll update all of the programs that you've selected on there. So like, you've got Firefox, you've got like VLC, iTunes is in there, whatever. Instead of having to go to each application and check for updates, it'll take care of all of them in one swoop, which is awesome. And it works with Deep Freeze, and it works with Clean Slate, so pretty useful. Another kind of obvious one, offer guest passes for anonymity. Let people log on to your public computers without identifying their library card. Simple. And then Kate already talked about this one, cover the cameras on your laptops and other devices. And then, this is the last slide, I swear. Or there's one more, but it doesn't have anything on it. It just has my email. Ways to go further. So obviously I didn't talk about smartphones or social media or anything today. There's just too much else to go into. But there are some great resources that you can get some more of that information. So I've got links to all of them in our list of privacy tools. Prison Break is a really great website that you can go in, pick your operating system, pick your phone, or whatever, pick the service that you want to replace, and it'll tell you the compromised one, the non-private one, and then it'll tell you a free and open source private replacement that you can use for it. And they update that all the time. The Guardian project is a bunch of private and secure apps just for Android smartphones, really awesome project. Email self-defense. So we talked a little bit about email encryption and how most free email service providers are not private or secure. There's only one way to achieve true email privacy, and that is through PGP end-to-end encryption. It can be kind of difficult to set up, and both of the users have to be using it. They have to have it enabled. But there's a really amazing step-by-step guide from the Free Software Foundation that I've linked to. It tells you everything that you need to get email PGP encryption set up, and then they even have a bot that you can send emails back and forth with to make sure you've done it properly. Or you can send an email to me if you want to send me an encrypted email, and I will send you back one, and we can make sure that it works. So if anybody feels like setting that up, I would love to send you back an encrypted reply. And then surveillance self-defense from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. This is a really cool thing. They've got these different playlists that you can use. One of them is for students, one is for journalists, one is for sex workers. We've got a couple more. Basically, whatever, the 5 best tools for your situation for your privacy. And I'm actually working with them to make the librarian one, so I'm really excited about that. And then the last thing is a link to the Crypto Party folks. And these are some really cool people all over the world. The Massachusetts Pirate Party are the people who do Crypto Party stuff here. If you want to teach your patrons this stuff and you feel like it's kind of like beyond your technical capabilities, the Crypto Party folks will come to your library and they will teach these classes for you. They'll teach about email encryption, they'll teach about Tor, they'll teach about file encryption. They are really happy to tailor it to whatever you want to teach your community about. And they're just wonderful people, so I really recommend getting in touch with them. Likewise, I'll send you my slides for the patron classes that I teach if you want to see them. You can email me. There's my email again if anybody uses XMPP. That is my Jabber ID. And please email me and ask for all my curricula and tell me if you install any of these on your own or if you teach them to anybody, if you've got some success with them, or if you have some difficulties. I would love to help you some more. And likewise, if I send you my patron stuff or these slides, please feel free to share them as long as you use this Creative Commons license, CC BY, and CSA, which just basically means you have to share it with other people and you can't make any money off it. Any questions? Yes?
I have a comment, actually. You said that the media around Tor is a lot of negativity, but I wanted to say that the only thing that I had ever really read about Tor was actually the article that you guys are in.
Oh, cool.
And so you are doing your jobs.
Oh, awesome. Wow, great. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, they have a publicity problem. It's not their fault, you know. So they are working on some restructuring in their organization too, and trying to focus more of their limited resources on outreach and publicity because the government has kind of ruined it for them, which is so shitty because the Navy was the one who started Tor in the first place. So, yeah.
Old people love to be scared about the wrong things to be scared about on the internet.
It's true. It's true. Hey, by the way, if anybody, you just reminded me of this, Hannah, if anybody is not in Radical Reference and wants to join Boston Radical Reference, we're having our next meeting on December 11th. Really cool people. I don't remember what our listserv address is offhand, but you can email me and I'll put you on the listserv. And we do cool stuff. We go to prison books sometimes. There's some people who are involved with the JP People's Tours, or not just JP, but the People's Tours. And our next meeting is at Community Change at the Yvonne Pappenheim Anti-Racist Library, which is an awesome organization, an awesome library. So,
Great, nice to meet you.
yes, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Be the coolest kid on your block and have the Get a Warrant sticker. No.
I also would just like to bring up one thing that I don't think that we quite talked about, which is that I know that we talked about sort of alternatives besides police for safety, and we discussed like social workers and other sort of non-police kinds of ways for dealing with people, maybe quote unquote problem patrons, or situations like if there's a kid who's missing or who's left in the library. For a lot of communities, social workers and other sort of social service agency representatives can also be means of surveillance, can also be ways that people are tracked, that people are criminalized, that people are brought into the system, from very, very early childhood to adulthood. So I think that a lot of these conversations need to be happening with your patrons and what makes them feel safest in your building. And also what is also their building. So I think that it's a little, I just want to point out that the conversation is not between having a social worker or having a cop, but it's actually a conversation with your patrons to find out exactly what works for them.
Totally. So, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because one thing I didn't say about the social worker relationship that we've developed is, in a lot of ways I feel like even having this relationship with your resource specialist is like a triage, just because you're like, okay, well, we can't call the cops. Like, we have to do something else immediately, right? So that, I think, is sort of where the social worker relationship came from. But because it takes more time and more resources resources to dedicate to, speaking directly to your community, but obviously that is the best way to serve your community if you're speaking directly to them. So I think that, one thing that's been great about teaching these computer classes to patrons is that we can sort of have at least a little bit of a conversation about privacy and what they want to see more of or less of in the library. So I recommend bringing these conversations up. If you teach a computer privacy class, talk to them about their privacy in the library from a general standpoint and how they feel about it and what they want, what makes them feel more, more secure. Thank you.